We're live now. We are live now. Steven, we're live.
Mark, are we live?
Yeah,
I,
there we go.
okay. All right.
Let's just hold on and let's just see if we can get some people to come on over to the other one. Dun, 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 dun. Technical difficulties.
Oh, well, real sorry.
We're real sorry about the technical difficulties. Yep. Let me put that out on the thing here. Um, bear with me. Oh baby, baby. Oh
Going
baby.
from caffeine to beer, baby.
What do you got there? All right. Um, Junk in the Trunk says we should be sorry. Junk from the Trunk. Did you see any of our stream for the last 15 minutes?
And please, by all means, blame Mark.
Yeah, seriously, no, it's all my fault. It
It
is
happens.
it is
It wasn't
100
on
my.
purpose.
It was all 100% my fault.
Stuff happens. Baby, I'm all fired up, ready to talk about McGuinn and Code, baby. I got enough.
Yeah. All right. Hold on. Hold up. Hold up. I paid 225 for this. John is on. Hey John, sorry. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, aka me terminating
Mark
the
screwed
stream.
up.
I screwed it up. I terminated the stream before it happened.
Oh,
Uh
look, we're live. I see us. Look,
yeah,
all
we're
right,
live
now we're
now.
good. All right, so did we see any of that, or do we need to start from scratch?
We
Hey, Mark, good
Hey
evening. Haven't
Steve,
seen
how are
you.
you? You'll never guess what records I'm going to show today. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. It's all good.
okay.
Yeah, so go ahead and kick us off, Steve.
Well, hey, how's everybody doing? Thank you for joining us. We are going to talk about the Byrds. It's going to be a mammoth episode, and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to hope that you're going to listen and enjoy and comment and subscribe and share and turn on notifications and
Hit
all
that
the other
like
kind of
button?
nonsense.
No,
There you
no,
go. No,
no.
smash that like button, Mark.
Smash
Smash that
that
like
like
button.
button. Yes, happy pre-Thanksgiving. I know this is some prime real estate. As Steve and I were talking in the previous stream that I terminated,
That you guys didn't hear?
that you didn't hear. We wish everybody happy Thanksgiving,
Happy,
and
safe Thanksgiving.
yeah, and we know that this is that time when you don't touch any of the pots and the pans. You don't do the extra dishes. You don't use an extra fork if you whatever, because you got to you're saving all that stuff for Thanksgiving. So we have a great show lined up, and it is the Byrds. So
Yes.
aptly titled here for Thanksgiving.
You
Uh,
guys get that? The Byrds Turkey Day,
yeah,
right? Byrds
stuffing.
Turkey.
Yep. All that good stuff. So yeah, welcome guys. We're gonna go through pretty much the entire Byrds discography. We're actually not going to pretty much. We are going to do. We're going to look from probably about 1962 through 1973. Lots of good stuff to talk about. Steve, I know that you've been working on this. I've been working on this. We haven't been discussing it behind closed doors. Made sure that we weren't texting each other about our little tidbits that we were discovering and things like that along the way. So, uh,
Although it was very tempting to. We kind of, at least I did. I kind of like started to, and I was like, "Hey, you know what? We got to save it for the show.
you were like,
Save it for the show."
you know what my new favorite Byrds record is? It's like, no, 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 nope, 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 nope. I don't want to know until Tuesday night, Steve. So, yeah, so we have a really awesome show kind of lined up.
Yeah.
Show and tell. We're gonna go ahead and do that here first. Steve, what do you got?
All right. So the first one, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Survivor Series, 1995 is the one I watched. The main event was Diesel versus Bret the Hitman Hart, and 95 was a rough year for wrestling fans. So, I'm going to breeze through these three records real quick, Mark,
Okay.
and then I'll flip it over to you. So the first one that I've listened to, and this is one that I put on today, and it was just really hitting all the right notes, so to speak. Pun fully intended. It's Return to Forever. Where Have I Known You Before? This is probably my favorite by them. Return to Forever. They're so great. To me, they never put out a bad record, at least in the 70s. Romantic Warrior seems to get the nod, and rightfully so. That's a great record, but that one is the one that I listen to consistently, and that's just a great record all the way around. This is I've had this record for a couple of years, and I put it on the other day and really loved it. It's Bo Hansen, Lord of the Rings. It's a great companion piece to, I guess, if you're reading Tolkien and whatnot. So
that
and
that one is just really I don't I feel like there's not or they re-released it or something like that.
I have no
And
idea.
it's not something that's like you don't see that, like you see the record all the time, but like you just don't see like the CD of it. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't seem
Oh,
like
okay.
it's like just not one that people talk about. But it's out there. You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah,
it's always like you see the cover. Hold that up again just to show the cover. Like it's just like you
it's pretty
know,
neat.
yeah. And it's not really like heavy duty prog, right? But it's like
Uh it's whimsical. Is it whimsical prog? Can we call it whimsical prog?
okay, yeah. Um, but it's good. It's a great record that I don't
Yeah.
really feel like a lot of people talk about. So, yeah. Two things that I have.
Oh,
Oh
last
yeah,
one.
sorry. Oh, okay, all
Almond.
right. Yes,
So
okay.
the almond. I figured I could chew the fat on this for a little bit.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
the Almond Brothers. I always butcher this title, but it's wipe the windows, check the oil, dollar gas. So an unnecessary, convoluted, long title for no reason. It's a fun live record. I mean, it's the Almond Brothers in the '70s live.
hmm
If you go into that expecting to hear like Fillmore East 2.0, you're going to be disappointed. But I think there's enough on there to warrant a listen. And it's really a lot of fun. It was recorded, I believe, during the 73-74 tour.
hmm
So there's, you get Jessica and Ramblin' Man, gosh, what else? Southbound, things like that
It is
are
like a
on
greatest
it.
hits live. I mean, it's
I mean,
on
it really
the,
is.
the track listing is pretty close to the Fillmore one, if my memory serves me correctly. So, I
They
mean,
have a
I was just
couple of repeats. Yeah.
yeah. There's, I mean, and again, it's what do you expect? It is you want that on a
Yeah.
record, or else it's not gonna sell.
Well, yeah, it's I think it's definitely worth checking out. So I enjoy it quite a bit.
Very cool. Have you had a
So
chance to listen to the CD of that?
I have
That
not
okay.
that you so
I
graciously
did put
found
that
for
in the
me.
mail for you, right? I'm just trying to
Yes,
remember if
no,
you
no,
got it.
it
Okay,
it's on my shelf.
it landed. Okay, good. I know.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't like talked about it. It really has been radio silence since the last week because I know we both have been really
Oh,
sort
dude,
of.
I can't keep surprises. I'm that guy. Like I'll buy you something, for your birthday, and I'll give it to you in August, and be like, no, I'll get you something else.
Very cool. Um, all right, so a couple of things. If you got any more, is that you're good?
No,
Three?
no,
Those are
that's
three.
it.
Okay.
Those are
So
three.
this came in the mail for me. I ordered this probably back in the beginning of November. It's a UK. I didn't mention that. This was only really released in the UK around 2009. It's Meat on the Ledge, an Island Records folk anthology. So there's a lot of good stuff. John Martin, Fairport Convention, Nick Drake, incredible string bands on here, Traffic. Uh, this when it came out in 2009, Mojo did like an album mount that was kind of a compilation of this compilation. So it really kind of turned me onto that stuff, back in 2009. So it's been a long time coming to get this. They also have another one that's a little more of the psychedelic kind of stuff. Um,
Oh,
it's called like Strangely Strange and Oddly Normal. I think it's just like a pink cover, but more so like Spooky Tooth, more of the bands that were more of the rock bands. So that's out there too. So good stuff. We'll put that right with the CDs on the CD shelf there. Boom. Um, and since we're talking about Thanksgiving, we have to talk about this record. Um, Steve, is there a record that you always play on Thanksgiving?
Well,
Uh,
not to sound cliche, but of course,
of
it's
course,
got to be,
it's got to be Alice's Restaurant by Arlo
and that's the
Guthrie.
one.
So yes, this is a record I play every Thanksgiving. I think about 11 years running, at least for sure, but many times before that. So we had a lot of funny things to say about that in the terminated stream, but it's okay. So we'll just sort of move on. But yeah, it's a great record. Like you said, nobody listens to side two. Um, I
There's a
usually
side two.
there is a side two to this record. I usually put it on side one, and then we're usually going to whoever's house for Thanksgiving. So I usually just listen to the first side, and that's usually all that I normally uh, get a chance to listen to. So again, Thanksgiving tradition. The dump is closed on Thanksgiving. Um, so yeah. So shall we? Let's get into it. So
Woo wee! Are we ready,
this might be a long one. So um, get
Mister Hour and a Half? Listen to this guy.
this is and it's already 9 o'clock. So can we talk about this in an hour, or it might roll a little bit longer. So we'll see if you
Get you
got
one of
coffee, you
those.
got beer, you got whatever.
Oh, I got coffee, I got beer, I got water, dude. I'm ready to rock. I put it on the Facebook page, man.
There we go.
This is I am all
You're
liquefied.
you're ready to go.
I am.
Great news. We got 6 people
Hoo-hoo.
on. So after that's good. So after all the nonsense that happened, welcome everybody that's on. By the way, so if
Thank
you
you.
feel free to comment if you have any questions about some of these albums. We'll try to answer it the best we can, or if you have any fun little tidbits about the Byrds that you want to drop in, we'll be sure to read your chats messages right here. Boom,
Yes.
it's right there. So Steve, we are going to start. I figured we would maybe start a little bit. Let's talk about the pre-Birds, right? So what was going on to basically align all of these members into the Birds? Um, Craig, welcome. He says turned in time just for the Arlo mention. Well, it's good to see you, Craig.
All right.
Thanks
Likewise.
for. I hope you're at work getting like time and a half or something like that. That you're watching this now. That would be awesome. But welcome and happy Thanksgiving to you. So, yeah. So the Birds. So as far as I think we know the Birds as sort of. I think the collective thought of the Birds is the first two albums, so Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn Turn Turn. I think a lot of people don't really know about sort of some of the other albums, unless you really delve into the catalog. I'd say if you just would pull the person, somebody off the
Which you
street,
should.
right,
Which you should. I can't recommend that highly enough. You absolutely head first.
right. Um, but I think that that's in joking about sort of our time life kind of riff that we were doing last week. That where they played Turn 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 on Ed Sullivan, that's like forever in my mind. That's sort of like I would say that's probably like my first exposure to the Byrds. I just remember sort of seeing that on the infomercials and hearing that song. Also to Mr. Tambourine Man, but I definitely that visual of David Crosby in the green poncho cape kind of thing. Yeah, I mean that's
Well,
sort of my introduction to them, or just what that kind of sticks out in my mind of what the Byrds is.
so that was probably like your earliest exposure to them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
How about you?
My earliest exposure to them was hearing them on the Wonder Years.
Okay. All right.
I was a big fan of I thought Kevin Arnold was like the coolest kid when I was like 9-10 years old. And I remember watching the Wonder Years, and you would hear the Byrds throughout them pretty regularly. I definitely remember hearing Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn 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 through there, and just really liking it. And that was probably, I guess, my earliest exposure to the Byrds.
I think that the really with I think their legacy basically revolves around sort of that as well too. I think that a song like Mr. Tambourine Man is such a time capsule for the 60s where that's just like you just instantly play that and it's like suddenly it's the mid 60s. You know what I mean? I think that
Mm.
that's and really it's funny because it's 1964. Or is it 1965? I don't know. We'll find out. I've written so many numbers down. I'm not even too sure. Um,
I've June 22nd, 1965,
65.
to be
Okay, right.
specific.
Oldies Radio comments. I heard the Byrds first on Entertainment Weekly Rock Archive CD when I was a small child in the 90s. Mark Neely comments, Notorious Bird Brothers is my favorite record of all time. So we'll get there. We'll get there, Mark. Thank you for stopping by. Happy Thanksgiving to you and Oldies Radio. Welcome. We will definitely talk about the Notorious Bird Brothers. And
Right
I
now?
and I have a feeling it's Steve's favorite record. I'm just gonna say that right now, even though we'll see. Um, but yeah, let's get into it. So, 1962. I'm going to start us right there. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of what Roger McGuinn was doing at the time. So he appeared on a handful of the Chad Mitchell Trio albums. The interesting thing about that early 60s music and especially folk music, Steve, I know this isn't your forte. It's not 80s glam metal or anything like that. So I'm going to kind of take the helm here about about unaccompanied
Well, when
folk
we do a
music.
Cinderella retrospective,
Right.
I'll
Okay.
take the helm on that one.
um, so he was on about four of their albums, right? So,
Right.
but in the early '60s, a lot of that stuff is these guys are hired guns, so they're not necessarily. You don't see. You don't see basically liner notes that say, "Oh, Roger McGuinn did X, Y, and Z." A lot of times they were on salary, so the Chad Mitchell Trio, they're out playing, and Roger McGuinn gets $200 a week, right? And that's just what he was doing. So there are two albums, and I kind of put down their information. So February of '62. There's the album called A Mighty Day on Campus. Now I didn't dig this out because obviously these aren't like talk, but the record stack for me. I
They're in the
have
basement
I have
in
them.
a
They are
box.
they are in the basement, probably not necessarily in the
Yeah.
box, but yeah, they're in the temperature controlled the storage room. Uh, yeah, it's so he's on the cover of it. So if you can just visualize this with me, or you go out to Google and take a look at it, they're basically there's like the campus sort of courtyard, and it's the three guys from the Chad Mitchell Trio, and Roger McGuinn's walking with his banjo, right? So there's that one, and then there's also in August of '62 there is At the Bitter End, which is the Chad Mitchell Trio at the Bitter End, and they're sort of kind of front and center, kind of singing, and then sort of in the background, but still kind of in focus. There's Roger McGuinn there in the background. So he was at that time he was sort of doing those kind of things. He was again another hired gun on Judy Collins' third album, which actually has probably one of the earlier versions of Turn, Turn, Turn. So Pete Seeger's is probably the original, and then that one. So he arranged it, and it's interesting. It's sort of kind of birdsy, but it's chamber orchestra. There's just really like an acoustic bass, a little bit of 12-string guitar, and then another guitar. So it's a very simple. Arrangement. So those are two records. If you want to get like early Roger McGuinn stuff, go ahead and check those out. Um, Sort of at the same time, this is sometime in 1963. David Crosby is with the Les Baxter's Balladeers. So, are you familiar? Do you have
I
any?
am.
Okay, tell me, what do you know about
Yeah.
Les Baxter? So tell me what you know about him.
I've got man, it's gonna sound you put me on the spot, but it's a yellow cover and there's like a bird on his guitar neck. That one?
Well, he did a lot of
No,
exotica records. Yeah. So no.
maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. No,
Okay.
I'm thinking of like Les Dukes or something.
Okay. Les Paul,
Maybe
maybe. I don't know.
no, not Les Paul. No. He plays a Les Paul, but no.
So
He-
he's in this band called Les Baxter's Balladeers, which
okay.
again Les Baxter does a lot of he does a lot of exotica music, what we would call now. But there was a handful. Well, really, there's only like maybe two folk albums that there was, and it was very New Christy Minstrels. I love this part of folk music too because this is like A Mighty Wind. If you've ever seen that movie, like it's like the new Main Street Singers. Have you seen that movie before?
No.
You need to see that movie. So
Okay.
um, so David Crosby's in this band, and is very they do a couple of like Lead Belly color covers. There's an album you can get there's a single that they released, but then there's also an album which has some Jim and Jean stuff on it, which they covered a lot of Phil Oakes. But it's Jack Linkletter's like folk festival or something. What is it? Yeah, a folks festival. And it's sort of it's like a compilation of sort of all the singles. It's supposed to be a live album, but I would gather that it's probably, I'm sorry, the chat's cracking me up. Somebody just asked the singing nun and Les Dudek. Um,
Yeah. That's him. Who said that?
Les Dudek. Craig said that.
Okay, yeah, Craig.
Um,
Yeah, Craig. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
uh,
Dude, and speaking of the singing nun, I love that record.
that was
That's a great record.
it's one of my favorites of my dad's. He was, was
Yeah,
yeah, he references that album quite a bit. So David was sort of doing this stuff. Gene Clark,
yeah,
he was doing things with the New Christy Minstrels. There's really about maybe 4 albums that he appears on. Again, it's one of those things that he was kind of in the background for that group. Like he was like pretty much at that time. Barry McGuire is sort of the front and center guy. They just like he joins the band. They do like Green Green, which was like one of the biggest hits that the New Christy Minstrels, I'm sure you know all this stuff, right? It was one of the tunes that they did. So he's on this Christmas record. It's not the one that has the the Hall Out. We Need a Little Christmas.
yeah.
That came out later, like in
Okay,
'67 or '66 or '67, something like that. But there's sort of like a sleigh on the front, and at that time there was Barry McGuire, um, Gene Clark was in the band, and then Larry Ramos, who went on to play with the Association. So again, there was that's kind of like the peak era of the New Christy Minstrels, if you're interested in that stuff. So um,
so McGuinn was already, I don't want to say established, but he was already, him and Gene Clark were already, I guess, well-known local musicians, or were they on kind of a national
well,
level as well?
the I mean. Real quick break here. Craig asks, "Have either of you seen the Gene Clark documentary?" I haven't. I know of it, but I
Hmm.
haven't. Um,
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
uh, so the New Christy Minstrels, I mean, they were pretty. If you think about folk music at that time, I mean, that was pretty safe folk music. So they would
Mhm.
do a lot of like,
Well, Barry
you know,
McGuire, I mean, was that before he kind of like Eva
this is
Destruction and all
before
that?
Eve of a Discretion, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
So it was really, and again, if you would watch the movie Mighty Wind, this would you would kind of it would make sense to you. But it was just
all right.
there was just these groups of there were like these troops of like 12 people they would sing these folk songs, and then they would get everybody to sort of join in, like these Michael row the boat ashore kind of things. And that was what was popular. So that was like in 1964. We have to think about that. This is before the Beatles, right? So all this stuff, 63, things like that. This is all going on, right around this particular time. So you have these big groups, and there was the New Christy Minstrels, and then there was also a band called the Back Porch Majority, and they were sort of like the minor league of like the New Christy Minstrels. So like when you got really good, like you jumped from that band to that band, but they would play, and this was one of the reasons why Gene quit, was because they played so many gigs. Like they would play a show like every night of the week, and they were all sort of on um, like salary and things like that. So there was like the main guys were making big time money, but they were just sort of in the background. So um,
Hmm.
Oldies Radio had mentioned something about Phil Oakes. I'll throw in a little thing about Phil Oakes. There's a great album it's called like Campfire Sing Along, or like Camp Meetings Sing Along, or something like that. Yeah, he mentions the Journeymen with John Phillips, the Modern Folk Modern Folk Quartet. So there was a lot of these little folk bands that kind of they went on and did their, like Jerry Yester was in some of those, some of those groups. So a lot of these bands that you see were like they were popular in the '60s, where they became hippies. A lot of them were in sort of these kind of these folk bands that were inspired by Bob Dylan and things like that. But to answer your question, long answer to short question, this was just sort of like that was a thing. Like that stuff was very, very popular. New Christy Minstrels were very, very popular. They sold a lot of records. Their music was very safe, so mom and dad could enjoy them. They didn't necessarily do a lot of kind of like popular songs. They like wrote their own songs that was more like traditional folk songs and things like that. So,
Okay.
but so at that point, Gene leaves. There's a great story that he's in Canada, and he hears "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on the radio, and he also, or on a jukebox, and he also hears "She Loves You," right? And he just keeps putting money into this jukebox and like listening to these songs over and over and over again. And again, that's you think about some of the first Beatles records, like at that time they hadn't defined their sound, but it was like something where it was like we don't have to listen to folk music anymore. Like it wasn't, because folk music, it really at the end of the day, the Chad Mitchell trio, the Kingston trio, these they carry on the great American tradition, but it's cheesy music, right? By like 1964, oldies radio, you're just like lighting us up, and this is awesome. He said Jan and Dean did folk and roll. Johnny Rivers did one too. Johnny Rivers did a folk record. Again, this was just sort of like that was what was popular. Like people wanted to hear sort of folk records. Like after Dylan came along and he brought it into the mainstream, you think about the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan and how that sort of is an album that really you move away from sort of this like Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, sort of that was like the folk music of the 50s and stuff like that, and it brings it into the modern era. You know what I mean?
But after Dylan, that style of music, its popularity had a relatively short shelf life in hindsight. You're only talking about a couple of years.
Yeah.
Because Dylan, when of the first Dylan album came out? 62?
62. Yep.
Okay, and then by 64, 65?
66 he's electric. Yeah. So 4 years. But again, in the musical standpoint, those years, especially in the 60s,
in the 60s too, right, with everything moving and evolving so quickly, that might as well be a decade, I guess. So I guess exactly, talking about it out loud, I guess, that makes sense.
in 3 years in the 1960s, that was really like 10 years of what like modern times would be.
Right. Right.
So basically, Gene, he quits the New Christie Minstrels, and he goes to L.A. and lo and behold, he goes to the Troubadour in L.A., which at the time was called the Folk Den, and he meets up with Roger McGuinn, who at that time was playing Beatles songs, like on folk guitar kind of thing. So they meet up, and they start kind of singing, and then just out of the blue, David Crosby walks in and he starts singing harmony with them. But originally they were going to sort of do like a Peter and Gordon kind of Chad and Jeremy kind of like, the two dudes with the guitar kind of those, because that stuff was kind of, that was getting popular at that time. But here we are. So that kind of takes us up to really up to like the summer of 1964. So any input on those earlier years? Do you want to talk about?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, that's I don't know how much deeper you can get into that.
So there's a handful of records if you're kind of interested, if you want to see sort of what the Byrds were doing before that. Those are the ones to check out. And again, to me, I have them, but like at the same time, they're not records that I'm like, oh, I gotta listen to this. You know what I mean? So
there's nothing really like essential in there. It's more of kind of like a, hey, this is cool to see where this guy kind of started, or
right, yeah,
where the footsteps began.
Exactly, and it's cool to hear like even like with the the Crosby one, they do a song that I would suggest looking up. It's called Line and Track, which later on was sort of recorded by what is that? The Ray Corner and Glover. Oldies Radio. You're hitting us with all of these. He said the Brothers Four. Here, I'm gonna keep shooting them back to you. The Limelighters. Okay, your turn. There's a ton of that early folk music that's in America. If you look at the kind of some of the big labels to look at Vanguard. Peter, Paul, and Mary, absolutely. Look at the Vanguard records. Look at Elektra records. You got Tom Paxton again, and so on and so forth. There's so many of these folk acts that we talk about sort of keeping that relevance. that by 1964, 1965, 66, like they just become passe because they just can't keep up with the times, and they can't do pop music. So oldies radio said, okay, then I'll chill. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of great. There's really some great folk music out there if it's something you want to get. Verve Folkways, thank you. Yeah, so that's of course in the regular Folkways label, there's always lots of really cool stuff to do on that to check out. Um, so where do you start, Steve? Where do you want to jump in here? You want to talk
Well,
about the first album, or you want me to kind of lead us into that first album?
why don't you lead it? This is a retrospective. If
Yeah,
you
no, I'm good, man. We're
want
good.
to lead us in, because admittedly, like the prior to Mr. Tambourine Man,
Okay,
I'm in the dark, so
okay,
I'm learning just like everybody else. So
okay,
please.
cool. So let's take everybody up into, so this is August 11th, 1964, which this is sort of a pivotal moment in the sort of the Byrds experience. At this time, they sort of, they're together. They're called the Jet Set, is what they decided to call the name of the band. But in August 11th, 1964, A Hard Day's Night is debuted in theaters in America. And at some point, the guys in the Byrds go to the movie theater and they watch the Beatles. And this is where Roger McGuinn sees the Rickenbacker guitar played for the very first time, right? And he's like, okay, we need to go, and I need to pick up the Rickenbacker. So at that point, this is a very pivotal moment in
Yeah.
in the Byrds history. Right around that time, there is right in August they start recording demos. So it's at World Pacific Theater, or World Pacific Studios. I'm sorry. Um, I believe it's called Waldy Heater Studios, I think, in LA. A lot of these recordings are released as the album Pre-Flight. But do you have that album
So
that we
like
can talk about? Or
I do. So
okay,
like stuff like You Moving in Boston and
yep.
things like that.
Yeah. So, and of course, the original, they record, Mr. Tambourine Man.
Right.
Their manager, I guess, at the time, or producer, Jim Dickinson. Is it Dickinson? Dickinson, I think.
Dickinson.
Um,
Yes.
make a supercut of me saying that. So he basically gets an early acetate of Mr. Tambourine Man, and he's like, "You guys should record this." So it's on that album. We can talk about that album, I think, when we get to the actual release date of that, because this is like just
Yeah.
not really sort of known stuff right now. We'll keep that in the chronological order. Um, and so I believe it looks like in October 7th of 64, they do a one-off single with on Elektra Records as the Beefeaters. So they change the name, so it's sort of a British sounding sort of thing. Hey, Mike's in the house with Grown Man Record Night. Mike, happy Thanksgiving to you. We were talking about the Byrds. Um, so they record this and it flops, right? It goes nowhere. But this is sort of the first sort of really early indication of the Byrds. It's them playing their instruments, right? Whereas Mr. Tambourine Man is not necessarily that. So we get they do that it flops. Uh, and that takes us up to one thing that's sort of special about Thanksgiving and the Byrds. So Thanksgiving, this would be November 26, 1964. The Byrds, at that time, the Jet Set, they're all sitting around for Thanksgiving dinner, and they kind of decide on a name. And they were going to do, they're actually going to call the name Byrds, which it's a song by Dino Valente. Do you know who Dino Valente is?
Yeah.
Okay, so they were going to call that their name, and then they just decided
Okay.
to go with the Byrds. So again, so Thanksgiving is a special time because that's when the Byrds came up with their name and they got together for the very first time.
There you
Um,
go.
and so really, we kind of move from there to January 20th, 1964. The Byrds record Mr. Tambourine Man. And they record it with the Wrecking Crew, right? So they do basically the A side and the uh, the flip, which I don't know what it is offhand. I didn't write it down. Actually, I can look it up for you right here. Um, do 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 do. It is. I knew I'd want you. So they record that, and they get the Wrecking Crew to do it, so nobody's basically playing on the album. Gene and David and Roger, of course, are singing on it. And then Roger sort of is like, "Hey, can I play the 12 string on it at that point?" So they released that. They really didn't do anything with the album quite yet, because that's the interesting thing about that first album is that it's the single, it's the Wrecking Crew, but sort of the rest of the album, it's them, and you can sort of tell. Do you?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
you can
Oh
kind of
yeah.
judge
Yeah. Yeah. There's a noticeable difference in quality.
that. So they record that, and at the same time they're playing at Ciro's in Los Angeles. March 26th of 1965, Dylan appears on stage with them. They do a jam on "Baby What You Want Me to Do," which is a Jimmy Reed song, and he kind of gives them the approval, right? So there's like a lot of the LA kind of like, oh hey, Dylan was here, and he kind of gave them his stamp of approval. So um, yeah. So Oldies Radio said some records do cute things and say stuff like this side, that side instead of A side, B side. Yeah, that's some good stuff. Um, I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head, and I know that there's some that do that, or that'll say like this side or other side. They'll do things like that. But this brings us up to April 12th, 1965. Mr. Tambourine Man is released. So the single basically goes up to #1 on the charts. So what do you think about Mr. Tambourine Man? I know I've talked for a lot, so I'm gonna.
The the song itself, I mean, it's great. It's the idea is to make I guess a Dylan song you can dance to, which
Okay,
was the I
right.
guess at least the label's intent behind it. I think they definitely achieved that. I'm not a big fan of them leaving out some of the verses, but I guess hey, you got to cut it down and
Radio
make
friendly,
it a
right?
pop song and a radio friendly song, right? So, yeah, I mean, the song itself, I mean, it's classic Byrds. It's one of their hallmarks. When you like we said at the top of the show, that and turn are kind of synonymous with them, just kind of right out of the bat,
Yeah,
right out of the get go. So
sort of that, like I said, that time capsule of the 1960s. So, um, it soon after that, so this would have been. So here's some. I took down some notes as far as with, um, sort of their TV appearances too. So I thought some of these little
okay,
things were sort of interesting as well too. So May 11th, 1965, they appear on American Bandstand and they play Mr. Tambourine Man. So that's sort of, again, it's a famous clip that they always play. It's the black and white clip, of them performing that song. So uh, and then June of '65. Um, it finally gets to #1. So it took about a month or so to really kind of get some traction. So um, Craig
we
said,
also got to think about what they're up against at that time too.
yeah. Do you have some
So,
details about that, or did you kind of
um,
think no?
and not specifically, but one thing I did want to say before I forget it, what I find interesting about this record, the Beatles were always synonymous with love, and the Stones were kind of like one of those things where it was more like they
Let's
would
spend the
come to
night
town
together.
exactly. That's no, that's perfect. But with the Birds, you kind of get the best. You get kind of like the snarl of "I'll feel a whole lot better,"
Hmm.
which is kind of like a Stone, when you're gone, kind of
Yeah.
like a Stone sentiment.
Yep.
But I think you get. I knew I'd want you. I think it's kind of Beatlesque in the sense that it's a love ballad.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of get that good yin and yang, if you will, between the two bands, and that's not you don't really seem to get that with other bands, and it was just kind of it was enough for me to kind of pause and look at it for a second. The Birds, they kind of incorporated both sides, which I think was really unique at that time.
Well, I think you have to, Mr. Tambourine Man in particular is. So I know a lot of people that don't like Bob Dylan, right? I know that you and I are, absolutely cuckoo for Cuckoo Puffs about
Yeah,
Bob Dylan.
what's not to
Uh,
like?
but I think that if you look at Mr. Tambourine Man, that is really sort of that defining moment where, you know, Roger McGuinn's voice is sort of like Bob Dylan light, right? It's like you're still getting the song, you're still getting it like as close as you can get to Bob Dylan, but it's not like it's not Johnny's in the basement mixing up the medicine. I'm on the pavement thinking about the government, right? Like it's not like the your normal sort of whiny Bob Dylan voice. So I think that's one thing that sort of hey, it's Dylan, but it's at the same time it's the Byrds. So and I think putting him kind of giving them that stamp of approval, I think that sort of really did a lot for their reputation. I don't think if he would have sort of supported them, like would they have propelled into stardom as quickly as they did,
They may have not. They may have been kind of looked on as the monkeys with that kind of that sarcastic scoff and things like that.
hmm
It had Dylan not given his stamp or worse, panned them.
hmm
Would they have gotten that approval from the folk crowd, or would they have strictly been just kind of like the bubblegum crowd that maybe is not the biggest Bob Dylan fans? You know what I mean?
right.
Would they? I don't know that they would have gotten reach both audiences, I
Well,
guess is what
right.
I'm trying to
It's
say.
again, it's the same thing that sort of the Beatles did with some early blues music too, and and just some of the just with their style of music, it's pop music, right? So it appealed to that kind of lowest common denominator, which I think, and we'll talk about this, I think that kind of plagued the band later on, right? So they went from being a pop band to sort of their audience sort of has to move with them, right? So you think about the same time as sort of the Beatles, Revolver, Rubber Soul kind of era where their audience sort of grew up a little bit, and then at
Mm-hmm.
that point it's either like, okay, this was a boy band from my childhood, or this is a band that I'm going to continue to follow along with. So I think
Right.
the same dynamic happens with the Byrds, and again, there's it gets kind of wacky. And I know we're gonna love to talk about that stuff here. Um, June 14th, 1965, they release All I Really Want to Do, and this is so that was already in their sort of their repertoire, and they were playing a show, and Sonny and Cher came and watched the show, and Sonny Bono recorded like their entire performance. And Cher goes
Oh, wow.
back and she records All I Want to Do. And so they kind of rushed that single to kind of get it to compete with hers, but of course Cher's does much better than theirs. In the UK, it kind of flip flopped, so their single did better than Cher's version did. But that hits number 40 in the United States in 1965, and then 2 weeks later, we have the release, June 21st, 1965. We have the release of Mr. Tambourine Man. So the album is officially released, and it gets up to number 6 in the charts. So let's talk about that album. So what this is where I'm gonna kind of hand it off to you for a little bit. So you want to go ahead and talk about that album?
Yeah, it's definitely
I'm gonna
much
pull
of the
my
same.
copy out here too.
Well, I've got it right here. It's definitely a record that I think there's an awful lot of Dylan covers on it.
Right. Yep.
I think that was definitely them kind of pushing to fulfill whatever quota was put on them. Do you think that was kind of pressure from the label, or do you just think that's what they wanted to do? Like, hey, we need to make a Dylan dance record.
Well, I think on the one thing too, when they were going to release their third single, so third single turns out to be Turn Turn, but they actually wanted it to be a Dylan one. They didn't want it
Mhm.
to be Turn Turn. So yeah, I mean, I think that I think they're kind of in a way that sort of becomes a positive and a negative for them because they continue to, throughout their career, they record Dylan. Pretty much, there's a Dylan song on every single album. So,
Just about, yeah.
yeah, until the end, then it starts getting a little patchy. But yeah, I think they sort of. I think there was maybe a little bit of pressure from the label where they sort of was like,
Yeah.
this works. This was a number one single. So let's go ahead and keep, kind of pushing these things out. But it's a weird album. Especially at the end with the We Will Meet Again.
Yeah.
You sort of think about the sort of the Vera Lynn, Doctor Strangelove had just kind of come out sort of around that same time. So you think about how that movie ends. If you haven't seen that movie, then
Yes. Yeah.
you
I
know
have. Yeah.
please go see that movie. But
it's a little uneven for me, and
okay.
I'm not judging that album against the rest of its catalog. I think that's really important to kind of look at these albums individually, not kind of judge them again, which kind of latter records. But this album is kind of it's very uneven for me. The stuff I like on it, I like. The stuff that I don't, I really don't like. Like We'll Meet Again, I'm not a huge fan of. Um, it's No Use, Don't Doubt Yourself, Babe. It's a very uneven. And in fact, looking at the track listing right now,
Hmm.
outside of I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better,
Hmm.
um, I like the Dylan covers.
Right.
So some of the original material on here, I'm not the biggest fan of.
Yeah,
Which
I mean, you have Mr. Tambourine Man, Spanish Harlem Incident, All I Really Want to Do, and Chimes of Freedom. So you have four Dylan
which is
covers.
really good. Which
Yeah,
is really good. I think Chimes of Freedom is really good.
yeah. Um,
So
you have those four, and then the interesting thing is that most of the other songs that aren't a cover song, so to speak, um, they're a Gene Clark tune, right? So Gene
right.
Clark wrote, the majority of this album. So I think for what it is, I think it's a great, again, it's a great album. Um, I don't feel like it's like if you want one album by the Byrds, this is the one to get. I feel like there's better albums, wink wink, in their catalog. But
Yeah, but we're gonna have to wait a while till we get to them.
yeah, that'll
Spoiler
happen.
alerts.
Probably happen around 11:30 by how we're going with this. Um, Thanks for everybody who's still with us. I know this has turned
Yes,
into
please. This is we're gonna gush over our love of the Birds. If you haven't told by an hour and a half in already.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, I think it's again, it's um, you think about the music that was coming out at the time, and sort of the other pop things, other pop bands, where this album just sort of is. It does stand out, right? It's not one that's just like, hey, this is another album. Um,
No, it's not forgettable in the least.
yeah, it's
You know,
no way I know that they started playing up saying this was America's answer to the Beatles. I believe at the same time, I think that when this album came out, I think that House of the Rising Sun by the Animals was like really high up in the chart. So just to kind
okay.
of give you an idea of sort of where that lands. Yeah, that's really all I kind of have to say about that. So yeah, I think this is still a nice seminal piece. Not necessarily the first place to sort of start with the Byrds, um,
No,
but
I,
still,
I, I wouldn't. I wouldn't put that on my like short list of essential Birds records.
yeah. All right, so after the album is released that summer, so this is like August 3rd through the 17th of 1965. Um, the Byrds have a European tour, right? So they're so hot. Hey, this is the great new pop band. They go and they head over to Oldies Radio. Man, you're just dominating. And so there's a UK band called the Byrds, which Ronnie Wood was in. Yeah. There was another band that I think they have one song or two songs maybe that's on the that Nuggets 2 box set. Um, so
And I
yeah,
agree with him. The Monkees are awesome. I
yeah, I think
headquarters and Pisces
yeah,
are fantastic.
yeah, it's great stuff. Um, so they do this European tour, and it's just you got to think about 1965. Like the band was just not the musicianship is not there. It's sort of just you're like step above garage band, right? It's a little bit better than that. So they kind of I don't want to say that the folks in the UK didn't really get it, but they just weren't used to sort of the Byrds sort of being, oh, this is the answer to the Beatles. Well, the Beatles were awesome, right? And they just weren't.
Well,
The musicianship just wasn't there.
but their albums charted a little bit higher in the UK than they did the US, believe it or not.
Okay.
So I definitely think that it's kind of odd because there's such a rootsy Americana band that people kind of label them as, and rightfully so. But the English fans really seemed maybe in the later period to really latch onto them.
Well, and I think that, and sometimes that's, I think what Great Britain does best is they just sort of like sell us back stuff. You think about like how British blues was basically they were just selling us back blues music that we kind of turned our ear to and weren't really
Exactly.
listening to. Bands like
That's a
Love,
great point.
right? Like Love was a pretty good band that, they didn't tour outside of California, so nobody really cared about them in the United States. Uh, in Great Britain, they absolutely love the band, and of course, there's that revival sort of in the the late '90s, early 2000s with Arthur Lee up
Hmm.
until his passing and things like that, where it was just
Yeah,
like
did that live record. That's a
yeah,
great like where he did Forever Changes live.
yeah. Um,
That's a great release.
so I do have UK charting, so we can definitely review that if you want to take a look at it. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
just for reference, Tambourine Man in the United States went to number 6. In the UK, it went to number 7. So, again, it was this in this case, but again, it's like it's a perfect American California record, right? It just is. It's like the Beach Boys of the mid '60s, right? It's like that sound is just right there.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so the European tour doesn't really go too well, but they get to meet the Beatles and the Stones and all these other bands and things like that. So that was sort of their kind of in with a lot of these bands, and part of their popularity happens too because the Beatles start saying this is my favorite American band, or this is because at that point who is it, right? Like who are the American pop bands in the early '60s? Who are they?
Well, at this point in time, the Byrds are pretty much it.
Exactly.
That you could compete on that level with the Beatles and kind
Mhm.
of rub elbows with them. Yeah, the Byrds are really it.
Yeah. So really, there weren't, there weren't really any bands kind of doing that, and it's interesting too because you also have there's sort of that injection into pop music that's sort of like when you have Bob Dylan going into that it's a little more intellectual, right? So you think
Right.
about just rock music in general up to that point, like what is it? It's surf music, right? So like that's what it is. Like we said, we're talking about like the Beach Boys. That was what was popular in the United States, and then it becomes this sort of California cool, kind of things like that. So, Oldies Radio said Crosby met Nash of the Hollies. There you go. So, 1965 is already making those connections. Um, so we'll go ahead and move to October 1st of 1965. Turn 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 comes out as the third single, and it goes to number one, right? So it's number one in the United States, and it goes to number 26 in the UK. Um, but again, you have this is a very interesting time now because you have where you have sort of the a song that's pretty much written just straight out of the Bible, right?
Hmm.
And this is a pop song and this is on the radio, and usually the twain shall meet with those kind of things, right? So you either have your sort of Christian music on one side and then your secular music on the other side, and there is this, but this is like the only time that ever happens with the Byrds. But again, Roger McGuinn worked with Judy Collins on Judy Collins 3 where they recorded this song. What's your thoughts on Turn Turn?
The song,
Yes.
it's about as perfect a song as you can get.
Okay. Yeah.
The album, not so much, but definitely the song. It's a beautiful song. It's a classic song, and it's remembered for all the right reasons.
Yeah. And again, it's a different when we talk about the album, we can probably talk about sort of its. I feel like the second album they sort of start like treading creative water. Like it's not really nothing really happens on that album outside of
It
the
doesn't. It's to me. They're spinning their wheels. There's nothing really groundbreaking on it. And this is probably as far as their early catalog goes. This is one that I don't revisit often.
yeah. It's yeah. I mean, and it's a great tune. We'll show the album when we get to it. Um, October 19th, 1965, they play a thing called the TNT Show. This is on YouTube if you want to watch it. They play Turn Turn, Mr. Tambourine Man, and the Bells of Rimney. And the funny thing is, and we'll talk from a musical sense here. All those songs are in the key of D, and it's like 10 minutes, and it's a lot. It's a lot to
Yeah.
digest at that point, where it's just kind of like this is the same sort of thing over. Like, okay, this is what this band does. It's just really, and then the rim. It's just like really pandering, right? It just doesn't really
Right.
seem to go anywhere. Um, And then November 29th, 1965, they play on Hullabaloo. They play The Times They Are Changing, and they also do this weird Do You Believe in Magic? You should check this out. It's very strange. So even though it's a Lovin' Spoonful song, they're singing along and kind of miming to the camera. It's a great kind of clip. So check that out. Hullabaloo, 1965. December 6, 1965, Turn 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 comes out. The album goes to number 17 in the United States. Goes to number 11. So you were right.
In
So
the UK,
in the
yeah.
UK,
Yeah.
so it does go
Yep.
higher. Boom, still got the half price bookstore sticker on it. $4.95. So it's really funny because pulling out my Byrds records, it's really funny to see how cheap they were. These are probably some of the very, very first, records that I got in my collection. So another one produced by Terry Melcher, right? So Terry Melcher produced the first two, and then they told him to go kick rocks. But so you have,
Well, they had to.
yeah, yeah. So they
Yeah.
do
But
lay down your weary tune.
We'll get into that.
Yeah. So lay down your weary tune. This is another Dylan song that's on here. Of course, The Times They Are Changing. So you kind of had two Dylan songs here. What are your favorite tunes on this one?
Besides the title cut, It Won't Be Wrong is fun. I really like, he was a friend of mine. That's really good. I absolutely hate their cover of Satisfied Mind.
But this is the first sort of like country rock injection, right? Or so
this and Oh Susanna are like shades, and they're not real bright shades, but they're shades of latter things to come. Yeah, but this album, this is just, Treading Water. Yeah, I would say that's being nice about it. There's not much here. Like, yeah, the Dylan covers again are good. Mm-hmm. I've already professed my love for the title cut, but other than that, man, this album, it's short, but it's not short enough.
I think too, like Oh Susanna is definitely like the fly wing in the sundae, right? So it's like the delicious sundae you're eating, and then the last bite has the fly wing on it, and it's like when I listen to
I don't know.
album,
I think it comes a little bit earlier, but I respect that.
Okay,
I don't disagree. So,
but in that last spot, right? That last spot on the album should be that's your point to say like I want to turn this album over, right? So let's think about the Doors, the sequencing of the first Doors album, right? So you have Break On Through, right. Okay, yeah, you got that first track, and then you have Light My Fire on the end. Yeah, I want to flip that over, and then you have the end, and you're just like, what did I just listen to, right? And you want to flip the record over again. You don't do that with this record. Like it doesn't happen.
And there has to be a little bit of, or there doesn't have to be, there ought to be, should I say, there ought to be a little bit of a hint on where you may be going next. Mm-hmm. There's none of that here. There's absolutely none of that. And I think a lot of that had to do with the producer.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that had to do with the label and the producer saying that this is what you guys are going to do. And I don't want to jump into 5D just yet, but I think that's where they can kind of spread their wings a little bit. And I think that's a huge leap forward. Right now, we're just treading water.
I like the very last sentence here on the, because keep in mind this came out December 6th, was that what it was? Yeah. The last thing on it says, enjoy this lovely album and give it to grumpy uncles for Christmas. It will help. Like, here, you throw this away. No, I'm just kidding. That's a little rough for this album, but it's again.
But it is.
It's not.
But it is treading water.
It's treading water, right? I think that again, the Dylan tunes that they picked out, they're not.
What else would they do? Really, what at this point in time in '65? What other Dylan tunes would they do?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, truly, and I'm not even being facetious. I'm legitimately asking, what other Dylan tunes could they craft and make into somewhat of a pop song? I mean, Hollis Brown, they're not going to do something like that.
Yeah. Well,
it's just.
Well, you think too, like you have another side of Bob Dylan, and you have also, What was the one before that? I forget. The times they are changing, right? You have those two
Right.
albums, and maybe Girl from the North Country, right? If I had to pick, maybe I'd say that would be a good one. But
With
again,
God on our sides, maybe, they
but
could have done that, kind of tied him in.
but they're just downer songs, right? They're just songs that they're going to do in the key of D, and they're just
Well,
going to
it's not.
sound
Well, it's
whatever.
not like the times they are changing is a. Well, I guess it is a pop tune according to this. So what do I know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Craig said a couple. He said sophomore slump in a way. Agreed. He
Yeah.
also said I found a decent chunk of those early albums in the dollar bin pre-vinyl craze. Yeah, used to see these all the time. I mean, I
Yeah.
would say paying $5 for this was yeah, again, it's a mono copy. It's whatever, but you were Sundays if you wanted a Sundays copy of it, it was $20. So yeah, that's it. So let's move on, shall we?
Please, quickly.
We got a good kind of clip here. Okay, so December 12th, 1965, they play Sullivan. That's the official Ed Sullivan Turn, Turn, Turn that you know and love, and you've seen on every Time Life Music.
And and we get to see David's awesome poncho.
That's right, which is on the cover of that. So you knew that he was just wearing that all the time, right? Like from what, like, well, I'll have to look on Hullabaloo. I think he was wearing it then. So that's it, at least from November of '65 to December. That whole entire month, he was wearing that nonstop. Um,
I'm sure that was wonderful for everybody.
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it smelled like patchouli and
Wet dog.
wet dog and El Diable de Verde. Um, Okay, so 19. Okay, so we get to February 18th of 1966. They release "It Won't Be Wrong" and let me look at that here. Let's see, where was that? I'm sorry, I missed it. "Set You Free This Time" and "It Won't Be Wrong." That went to number 79 in the United States and 63 in the UK. So again, this is their lowest charting. I mean, that's a pretty massive,
The
pretty
flop.
massive drop. Yeah, I mean it's a flop.
Yeah.
I mean it cracks the top 100, but
Yeah, but compared
yeah,
to what they,
right,
if we're going to compare to what the expectations were,
yeah,
judging by the expectations, yeah, that's a huge flop.
right. Um, and then in February of 1966, Gene leaves the band. So now they go down to a quartet. Um,
Now, Gene always had an issue with flying. That was
right.
his always big thing, is he hated flying. And did he just freak out on a plane and just cause a scene? And they were just like, all right, did we?
So I've heard different things. I heard that one, he was sort of like he had some anxiety around it, like he saw a plane crash when he was a kid, and also too, like he just didn't like flying. I think that in the new Christie Minstrels, like I said, they were playing a show like every night, so there was a ton of travel involved with it.
Which
Um,
is what I wanted to ask at the time, but I wanted
yeah,
to save it
yeah.
for this time.
So you'd figure that it was maybe bus trips, but I read a story where he was saying like he just was like I'm not flying to New York, right? So you have to think about that too. At that time frame, it was happening in L.A. where they could go and they could do these TV shows, or they'd had to go to New York, right? So it was like you go to Sullivan, you go do whatever. I don't know.
Or forget about touring Europe. You take
Right,
a bus to Germany.
right, exactly. Um, so yeah, so he leaves, and then we have sort of mid March, they release 8 Miles High and Why, which went to number 14 in the United States. In UK, it went to number 24. I do have a fun little piece of show and tell if you are in the market for this kind of stuff. So they recorded 8 Miles High at RCA Studios, and Columbia was like, absolutely not. We're not letting you record this song at a rival studio. So they had to re-record it. So there is a Sundazed 7-inch. I don't know if it might be on one of the pre-flight CDs. I know there's a lot of those. There's a lot of those out
Yes.
there. I'm not really too familiar with those. I never really bought into those, but they did do a 7-inch of that, which has the original RCA studio version, and of course in mono. So the way that you want to hear it. So 8 Miles High, that happens. So again, that was sort of they were listening to a lot of Ravi Shankar and John Coltrane, I believe,
Right.
at that
Exactly. I read
time.
that too.
Yeah. Oldies Radio said they had been rivals since 1901. So that's and they ain't gonna have any long-haired kids tell us any different in 1965, right? Or 64.
Smoking their marijuana cigarettes.
um, so you have that single come out, and then in June 13th of 1966, you have Fifth Dimension and Captain Soul come out, which um, two of my favorites. Those are some pretty awesome tracks. So it's really cool. Like I feel that 8 Miles High, Why, Fifth Dimension, Captain Soul, like they're hitting something here, right? They're moving on to something a little bit different than Turn 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 and all of the Dylan
Yeah.
kind of
I
stuff.
mean, it's a giant leap forward.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. It's a giant leap forward. I think that this album could have been bigger, providing Terry Melcher hadn't produced it. I mean, he was 20 years their senior at this point.
Okay. All right.
So I really don't. I don't know that. I don't know how much creative control was given to them. I'm going to assume that it was, more than previous albums because this is such a departure from what they had normally done. But maybe somebody with kind of a different ear about what was going on would have helped a little bit.
Yeah.
So
I want to throw this out to chat. What do you guys think about this sort of era? Are we starting to hit like the part about the Byrds that you get excited about? Like, what do you guys feel about these? Yes, the guy that Manson tried to kill. In fact, yes, this was Terry Melcher. That same Terry Melcher. I believe it was Doris Day's son. So,
yes,
same guy. He hung out with the Beach Boys and all that.
So I also think that this is this. Maybe I shouldn't say this right this way. I'll say it now. So I kind of look at this as like their Rubber Soul.
Okay.
Like it's the start of something that's not fully realized just yet, but it's the start of something that's really, really interesting. And I kind of think that the next albums in sequential order very mirror to what the Beatles were doing at that time. When you've got kind of Rubber Soul Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's, where you've got Fifth Dimension, Younger Than Yesterday, and Notorious Bird Brothers. And I think there's a build up to them. And I think we talk about a sweet spot, or at least I do. To me, every band, providing they have a long career, they're not like the Stooges where they just have 3 records. But if a band is around long enough to amass a pretty substantial catalog, I think there's a sweet spot, of course, right? There's always, you've got, hey, we're new, we're kind of finding ourselves. Hey, we're really hitting our peak. All right, we're kind of sick of each other and we're breaking up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a sweet spot in there. And I think this is, for me, this is the beginning of that sweet spot. This is kind of where the Byrds really take off,
Yeah. No, and I think that they start sort of figuring out their sound, and I think they become strong enough musicians that they can kind of create their own music, and it's not something that they have to look at. And I think that was one of the things that there was some animosity with Gene, because he was the richest Bird, right? Because he was the one that was getting the most songwriting money.
He's get the royalties, sure.
Right. The other guys weren't. So there was a little bit of like that where he was just like, he really didn't, hey, I don't care, right? Like, what else were they doing? They weren't really putting anything out at the time. So we get into some of that stuff too later on, where there's that really sort of that creative control thing, where it's really odd to look at those first 2 albums and just say like they were just either doing Gene Clark songs or they were doing Dylan, and that was it. And then where it's really like, this is this person's song, or this is this, so and so did this. So
I also think this is kind of like the start of, is this David Crosby's band, or is this Roger McGuinn's band? Like, I really do. And I think that it's not palpable at this point, but I think that it's definitely, all right, well, somebody's got to take over. Well, I should take over. No, I should take over. And I kind of think you kind of have that back and forth a little bit in this record. And later on it spills over, but I think this is, hey, we're really hitting our stride. We're defining our sound, but now we're kind of dealing with more conflict and more personal issues. So, I think that's also interesting to note. Another funny tidbit about this record, when Mr. Spaceman was issued as a single, the co-manager, Eddie, is it Tricker or Tinker.
Hmm.
He tried to drum up publicity by um, taking out a life insurance policy, or excuse me, taking out a policy of $1 million for alien abduction.
Hmm. Interesting.
So and obviously it didn't go anywhere, but that kind of got their names in the paper a little bit, and so kind of play up that whole space race that was popular at the time.
Well, yeah, and I see that they always were, especially those later albums. I feel that this is a motif that sort of appears a little bit more. It's the sci-fi part of the Byrds, right? So instead of it being sort of the protest kind of pop songs, this is their album that they're sort of like, this is us. Like we're sort of defining ourselves at this point.
Would you say this is their psychedelic record if you had to pick one?
Well, look at the cover, man. There you go. That ain't
But not
psychedelic. Yeah.
younger?
No, it's psychedelic, and I think that them sitting sort of on that magic carpet that's like floating in the middle of the album. I think that I don't know, that says enough to me right there. I like this
That
album.
always the cover always kind of looked like a smoking device.
Yeah,
A little bit how that's like all, and then
yeah,
you've got
like a hookah.
who is that? Chris? Yeah, exactly.
You got Mike and Chris is sitting down below. They're smoking cigarettes, and David's still wearing the poncho. So I'm not sure when this picture was taken, but here we are. This is what? This is July 18th of 1966, and you have David still in the poncho.
Well, they're smoking cigarettes to cover up the smell of hot dog water. So
Yeah, and then you have the polar bear that's in the back. He was in the band for a little bit.
he played bass.
He played bass on a few of the songs. But yeah, I like it. I think it's a great album. Van Dyke Parks is on it. I don't know if you knew that or if you know much about Van Dyke Parks.
Yeah.
So he's on it, but you have Hey Joe, which was kind of a weird thing. The Leaves had done that. Love had, of course, done that as well.
David pushed for that song. He wanted to record that
Okay.
For over a year.
Okay.
He kept pushing for that song because he really loved the Leaves version, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to record that song. And so it does seem kind of out of place on this record, though, does it not? It's a cool song, like it rocks, but it just seems really, really out of place on this record.
I feel like that's like to me sort of like a garage band kind of tune, right? You think about
yeah,
all those
yeah,
those bands.
It's right up there with the Trash Man and things like that. Like that's like a classic garage tune,
like a Hang On Sloopy, like that's sort of like a track like that. So it feels kind of out of place on the album, but it's to me it's that moment that it's like this is it's not anything like the two previous albums. It's sort of them kind of finding their own and defining their own, which as we get into the next album, I think that becomes much more apparent. So let's take a look at a couple of things here. So Fifth Dimension comes out. It went to 24 in the United States, went to 27 in the UK. In September 6th, 66, you have Mr. Spaceman comes out. That went to number 36 in the United States, and it didn't chart in the UK. So not really, nothing really happened with that. And then we get into my favorite year of the Byrds, which is 1967, because I love this is my favorite year for the Byrds. January 9th, 1967. You have So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star comes out, and that went to number 29 in the United States, didn't chart in the UK. So of course we know the Monkees are hugely popular at this point. They're into the first season the Monkees came out, and the Byrds, and I think in a way, I think part of the legacy of the Byrds were these guys were just jerks. Like they were just jerks, and I think that
to each other too.
Well, again, they never played Sullivan after Turn Turn. There was some bad stuff that I guess happened during the Ed Sullivan show. I can only imagine what it would be. But again, a lot of the infighting that we see later on. they're just, they're feeling cynical, and I think that David Crosby does mention that during the Monterey Pop thing. But they're just like,
Among many other things.
yeah, here's all the things that are sort of going on, and get your tight pants, make sure your hair is okay, get yourself an agent, and okay, you can be a pop star. Like, it's just like this thing that, like, it's just like this checklist that you follow, like, and that's sort of like in a very tongue-in-cheek way of saying that and being very cynical about it. And so I think that's, again, they're just being jerks, right? But it's a great tune. It's a really good
It's a
tune.
fun song, yeah, but yeah, it seems like it seems a little unfair to kind of ding the Monkees like that a little bit, just for what it is, it just seems kind of a little unfair.
Okay, so then you have February 6th, 1967, Younger Than Yesterday comes out, and it goes to number 24 in the United States, and it hits number 27. Whoops, I'm sorry, no, 37 in the UK. So I got my copy, $1, Bob. So
Wow,
back
look
in
at
the
that!
day, and it's a mono copy. So um, and a promotional album, I guess. So
Is
so
it
what?
white label promo?
I don't think so. So
No.
what are your thoughts on? Talk to me about Younger Than Yesterday.
So Younger Than Yesterday, there is a Dylan cover that's back, which I know kind of, the previous record there was no Dylan cover, which is another thing that I thought was kind of strange, but in a really cool way. And what I'm talking about them is a big leap forward. I think they were doing everything in their power to kind of shed that old
Yes.
skin. So I think that definitely is worth noting. Um, as far as Younger Than Yesterday, this used to be my favorite Byrds album.
Okay.
And it's still the one when I'm in the mood to hear the Byrds. It's still the one that I pull out.
Hmm.
I think that Renaissance Fair is one of the best songs in their entire catalog.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's
I think that has that song encompasses everything I love about the Byrds. The harmonies, the songwriting, the vocal delivery, the melody, everything about it. I think it's just absolutely perfect. Um, I think this is kind of where Crosby comes into his own with stuff like Mind Garden and gosh, what's the other song?
Everybody's been burned.
Yes, which I think are both really good songs. I think that this is Crosby really coming into his own and really I think getting that confidence that he maybe didn't have on the first couple of records.
Yeah, I think that I think, like you said, this is definitely Crosby's album, right? Where
Yes.
we see the evolution. Produced by Gary Usher for this one, so he did like Sagittarius and the Millennium, whatever, I forget some of the other albums that he did. But again, more of a producer that was sort of more kind of like psychedelic kind of pop. He sort of knew, and
Mhm.
I think that's his hand is in here. Mind Gardens, I think, in a way, can sort of be, um, I don't know. I feel that sometimes is a little not quite realized. It's it's like pompous Crosby, I think, at some point, which is what
Well,
we kind of
but that's
expect
the
from
thing.
David
He is
Crosby,
pompous.
right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But this is see, I always look at this one as their psychedelic record.
Okay.
I'm not saying that Fifth Dimension is folk or surf or anything like that, but I think that to me there's I don't want to say there's more elements of psychedelic on this record than the previous one, but I think that you could. I think these are very much again, just like I talked about a few minutes ago. This is very much their revolver. I really think that this is where they're kind of flushing things out and
Hmm.
they're trying new things. I think they're coming into their own as songwriters, and at this point, at least Crosby is.
Isn't there's a Chris Hillman song on this? Isn't I'm trying to think of which one it is. Um,
Thoughts and words.
it might be Thoughts and Words. I don't know. There's when I was listening to it this time through, I was like, that's one that I like never really. I think that's Thoughts and Words. Um, but it really, I think it has like pedal steel guitar on it. It's like really that, almost to the point where it's like you get like the glimpse of Sweetheart at the Rodeo, I think. Um, it has to be that one. I can't remember offhand. I should have written it down, but I didn't. Um, but yeah, so this is now your favorite. Yeah, thoughts and words. That's the one it is.
Well, this used to be. I don't.
Okay.
This used to be my favorite Byrds record, and
Hmm.
it still may be, but I don't think so. At least not as of this recording.
Yeah.
But like I said, when I'm like, hey, I want to hear the Byrds, this is always my go-to one.
Yeah.
And I hear the opening riff to so you want to be a rock, and
Do do
I'm
do
hook,
do
line, and
do do
sinker.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's again, it's a great tune, all around. So, okay, so the album comes out, goes to 24. Um, March 13th, they do Back Pages and Renaissance Fair. That goes to number 30. Let me look at the book here. Doesn't chart in the UK. Um, let's see here. And I'm sorry, right between this time too is when the Gene Clark, his first solo album, uh, comes out. So the Gene Clark and the Godsman Brothers, um, which
What
have
was
some.
that record? I've never heard it.
It's good. It's really cool. There's some good tunes. Here's another. This was a 7-inch that came out with some of the unreleased stuff. French Girl, which is a Ian and Sylvia tune. Um, I like Gene Clark. I like his early stuff. I really wish that this stuff would have been, if you want to get an original LP of his first album, it's like $200 now. Like
Ooh,
it's through the roof. Even the Sunday stuff. I mean, you got to think about again. This was when did this come out? 2008. Like some of this stuff has been out of print for like 13 years. Like we're kind of at that point now where like that stuff is like now starting to gain some value. So yeah, which is weird because I was looking for some stuff and I was like, oh, okay, you know, what's like, I'm not paying that much for that. So yeah, so that solo album comes out May 22nd. They do Have You Seen Her Face and Waves. Don't Make Waves. Uh,
I
that
love that song too.
yeah.
I wish that made the record.
Well, that's the cool thing about the Byrds too is you do have a lot of their non-album singles. So where it is important that if you either get it, get the single. I have a ton of their 45s, or they did release in the 80s sort of the singles collection and things like that. So it's
Mhm.
important to get that because I feel like there's some good stuff. A lot of the when they redid the reissue catalog again, this is almost 20 years ago now. I think it was 2003 when those came out. Um, a lot of it has the album plus the singles, which is cool. So
I mean, they really took their time with them. They've
yeah.
got thick booklets that come with them with some extraordinary liner notes. So those are all really great.
Yeah, those are I would say, again, they're worth picking all those up. I think that even the earlier stuff, it's great to see
Mm.
that. So that comes out, and then uh, May 26th of 1967, you have Sergeant Pepper is released. So, oh baby. Oh, we talking about the Beatles? Or we talking about the Byrds? I just wanted to talk about that just to give you an idea of sort of where we were in the
Well, it's important,
timeline
and
of
that's
things.
that's of course we got to mention that.
So that album comes out, and then about 2 to 3 weeks later, you have the Monterey Pop Festival. So this is more, sort of nuggets into the catalog. Uh, Not a good time to be David Crosby for the Monterey Pop
Or it
Festival.
could be a great time. It
Could be a
depends
great
on how.
part. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure he was having a blast.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. It's all about perspective, man.
right. So, he says some things that, he talks some political things, talking about dosing people with LSD,
Talks about
politicians and
Kennedy
stuff. Yeah,
assassination
exactly.
and
Conspiracy theory.
they've murdered witnesses
There
and
was multiple
you know
guns at
yeah.
multiple angles. The
and
information is
and they're
being
like, okay,
suppressed,
well, here's Renaissance Fair, so
and
it's
this
like
is your
it's yeah
country, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah
Okay. Talk about a buzzkill. But more importantly, he plays with Neil Young had left Buffalo Springfield at that point,
yes,
so he goes and he plays with Buffalo Springfield.
much to
And
the chagrin of everybody else in the Birds. I heard Roger was just absolutely fuming at that.
um, I'm sorry, the Oldies Radio said, what was the 45 company that put out reissue 45 collectors? Yeah, Collector's Choice is the name of that. So they have some good. There's not that good, but Sundays. All I can think about is that Sundays in the early 2000s, and that was there. It was all the Birds. Do you remember that, Steve? Do you remember like
What's that?
Like the Sundays, the label Sundays, like it
Yeah.
seemed
Oh
like
yeah.
they had,
I've got some love reissues
but they
and a couple other things.
but they had, they had access to the Bird stuff, and like if it was a Birds release, Sundays put it out. But yeah, oldies,
Yeah.
I think oldies.com was the website, my favorite website in the world. That's a joke. We'll save that story for another time. But yeah, Collector's Choice, I believe, is what the name of the company is. um, Monterey Pop Festival happens. They're kind of really at each other's throats at that point, not really too happy on what's going on. You have July 13th, 1967. Lady Friend comes out and backed with Old John Robinson. That went to number 82. Wasn't released in the UK. So Lady Friend is it becomes the first Crosby song that was 100% David Crosby. So
Mhm.
I think there was some. I have to. I'm not too sure off the top of my head, but I feel like there was. He took off of like McGuinn's vocals and stuff like that, and he just like this was like my song, right? So, and then I'm sure that was sort of a blow to his ego, right? So that went to 82. So you had, they were hovering in the middle of the charts with Mr. Spaceman and everything. But Have You Seen Her Face? Again, that's a David Crosby lead vocal one, and then the follow up to that, Lady Friend, 82. So what are your thoughts on that, Steve? You think that was kind of the point where David was like, you know, where his ego was kind of too big to fit into the
Uh,
recording studio, or
I mean, I think he was kind of done with the Birds, and I think that just kind of reemphasized. Well, I'm done. I'm not happy here. He puts out the single. The single does nothing. So I think that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin for his exit for the Birds. Although it wasn't by his choice,
right, right.
but I think that's kind of where he just kind of completely checked out. Then it at that point.
Well, there's a few moments here that within the next kind of little time frame that, like I said, this is sort of becomes the interesting part of the Birds. We can really start seeing the infighting going on. So that same day they play on the Tonight Show and they do Lady Friend. So there's no footage that exists of this, but there is a recording where I think, like, so Bob Newhart is the host for the Tonight Show that night, and he's like, hey, here's the Birds with their brand new I keep saying signal instead of single. Um, I hear them tuning up right now, right? And so they're like ding, 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 doing the little tuning thing. And Crosby says, "We tune because we care," right? And it's just like, and then the audience kind of laughs, and then they go into Lady Friend. That's out there on the internet if you want to look it up on YouTube. But again, I feel like that's another moment where it's like Crosby's just really like, you don't need to do that, right? I'm sure the other folks in the band were kind of thinking the same thing. Like, it's just like, don't be a jerk, right? Um, the end of July, so July 29th, 1967, they appear on American Bandstand. They play Have You Seen Her Face and Lady Friend. Um, and so then this is August 8th, or I'm sorry, August 7th of 1967. This album comes out. So the Byrds' greatest hits. So what do we think about this album, Steve?
It's a
Curveball.
greatest hits. Yeah.
It's
uh, it seems a little too early in their catalog
okay.
to toss out. But I think it's a good greatest hits if that makes any sense.
Mm,
Um, if you're a casual fan of the Byrds, that may be a good starting place. But I certainly don't think. I mean, it's a greatest hits at
yeah.
that point.
So
Doesn't cover a lot of ground.
right, you got
So
4 albums, right? You have 4 albums at this point. I will mention that in March, Columbia Records had put out Bob Dylan's Greatest Hits Volume One, so that came out at that point. Um, so do you feel like the record label was like, what's going on here? Like after Lady Friend and all that kind of came out, like
well, I think that they may have thought that okay, this band with their singles not charting very well and the infighting and the lineup changes, which they ain't seen nothing yet.
right.
I think kind of with that going on, I think they said, well, we better get while the getting's good and toss this out there and recoup a little bit of the money that we put in.
But it goes to number 6, right? So they just, so
Of course it
there's
does. Yeah.
still an interest in the Byrds. People were still kind of excited about that. Um, uh, sometime in August, we sort of like Mike leaves, right? So he's kind of like out of the band. They're like, we're much better musicians. You're kind of holding us back, kind of thing. He still sort of does still does the engagements when he has to do. And then you have in October, David is fired, right? Which we know this
Yes.
is sort of a famous moment where Roger and Chris pull up in their brand new Porsches and just kind of flip him the proverbial bird, and they're like, "Okay,
Well,
we'll
and
see you
and,
later."
and and David's response to that was, we can still make great music together. And then Roger, which we talk about the Byrds being jerks, Roger response was, we can make great music without you.
and then
So it's just,
and then they go
yeah,
away, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Craig was saying, the greatest hits album, cash grab to recoup some losses. I agree with you, Craig. I think
yeah.
that was sort of why that
Well,
happened.
like I said, their singles hadn't done anything. They had dumped a ton of money into that, the promotion and all that. So yeah, that was a huge cash grab, and it paid off for them. Like you said, it went to number 6.
Yeah. Okay, so David's fired. So October 20th, 1967, Going Back and Changes Now comes out. And there was some fighting too about David didn't want to record. He didn't want to record that. He wanted to do like, let's record our own material. So we can really see that with the last two albums where Craig says, or Oldies Radio says, got him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we got you. Um, um, David didn't want to record Going Back, which is a Carole King song. He was like, let's not do that. Dusty Springfield had recorded it about a year earlier, so
Oh
I don't know
wow.
if you know that she recorded it first. Um, so he didn't want to have any part of it, so that was sort of where them like whatever. David grows a mustache at this point, says Oldies Radio, so he becomes the
Loses the
walrus.
poncho, gains a
That's
mustache.
right. Starts getting a little thin on top. Um, so that goes to number 89 in the US, doesn't chart in the UK. Um, and then, so the interesting thing here, too, is that this is October 22nd, 1967. They play the Smothers Brothers, and Gene Clark is back in the band. So it's Mike, Gene, Chris, and Roger. So if you can search that one out on YouTube, if you look Byrds Going Back, you can see this where Gene Clark was in the band for about 3 weeks, and
Which
that's
is
not
wild to think about.
yeah. So he's back in
I
the
mean,
band. There's been some accounts that people talk about the Notorious Byrds brother record. Was Gene Clark on any of those tracks? So there's sort of speculation that he was. Some of it was just he was in the booth, and Roger McGuinn was in the actual cutting the stuff. So Mark, I hope you're still watching, Mark Neely. Or listening. I know this is it took us a while to get here, but we're here. So we're going to talk about the Notorious Byrd Brothers. So if you're still listening or watching, I'd love to get your sort of insight on this album. Uh, but this is sort of my favorite part. And the next like 3 months, this is some really interesting stuff happens. So in December of 1967, Frank Zappa records an episode with the Monkees. So, Steve, I know you've seen this. We've talked about this at
many
length.
times.
So
He plays a car.
he plays a car, and they play Mother People, and he's dressed up as Mike Nesmith, and Mike Nesmith is dressed up as Frank Zappa, and they sort of do this bit where they're pretending to be each other, and like, um,
It's actually really funny. I
it's
mean,
good. Yeah, it's great.
a lot of that stuff seems
It's
dated,
it's so smart,
but
but it's
this,
so smart.
it,
It's so
yeah,
smart.
it really is. I think it's genius.
And so then yeah, Zappa did show up in Head. There was two times that he did things with the Monkees, and that was right. He was he did sort of the critic with he's walking with a cow, if I remember correctly. And Davy Jones asked him a question. So Zappa's sort of going through and like, hey, the Monkees music, where's the soul of the music, things like that. And he makes a quip to Mike where he says, "When I quit the show, I'm going to join the Byrds. How about you, Frank?" And I feel like it's I feel like Mike didn't see that coming because his response to it was like that's what he was going to do, right? And he's like, "Well, I don't know, Mike. When I quit the Mothers, I'm gonna join the Byrds too." Um, and
Which, can I interject something
yeah,
real quick?
yeah,
who is Frank Zappa to be throwing shade about lineup changes and things like that? Like, I know we're, the Mothers kind of the
Yeah,
original lineup lasted for, a hair longer, but my goodness, it's like of all the people to be throwing that, it's like,
yeah, yeah,
you talk about somebody who's had multiple musicians, but
yeah. But
yeah,
I think it was one of those things that like he knew. I think he knew Mike enough that it was like, Mike was already looking for his exit. So this is season two. Like they are filming season two. Um, and I just, to me, it's just such a great. If that wasn't captured, it's so telling of what Frank Zappa thinks about the Byrds and what he thinks about the Monkees, and it's just like, oh, you're gonna go join the Byrds, yeah, because it's just, they're in such turmoil that they're a punchline at this point, right? Like,
but the thing I find interesting about it too is, can you recall a band, not now, but back then, what was a band that had so many lineup changes? I don't even want to say quickly. They happened quickly, sure. But I just mean overall, what's another band that had so many lineup changes in such a short amount of time
yeah,
back then? Nowadays, it's commonplace for, you told me a couple of months ago that the drummer for the Guess Who is taking out some dudes and playing Guess Who songs, and they're labeled as the Guess Who.
right,
So, that's commonplace now. It's commonplace for there to be, oh, well, there's the original bass player, of whatever band, especially some of these 80s bands.
yeah.
That's just so commonplace. But back then, I don't think that there was another band. And if anybody in the chat, or certainly Mark, if you can think of, I mean, who else had that drastic of a lineup change?
Well, I think what we saw a lot in the '60s was these bands would get popular, and especially this sort of this first wave of rock and roll. So you had a lot of these bands that maybe they got like a one-hit wonder, and then they just never went anywhere, right? That they released a single, it went up to number one, they never did a follow, or they did a follow up and it just didn't go anywhere, and the band just sort of, you know,
Right.
there are those stories of, oh, so and so got drafted, he had to go to Vietnam, and they broke up the band, and then they just never did anything, right? Like there's so many bands out there, and Ugly Things magazine does an amazing job at like covering these. Of like, here's this obscure band that did one song that was awesome, and then they just didn't do anything. Um, I really think after Gene Clark quit, that they should have just called it quits, right? So they should have said that was the Byrds. This is, we're on to the next thing, and that's the name of the band. I think just even doing that, I think would have maybe made it a little bit more palatable. But you're right, there's not. And I mean, you think about and you think about the Turtles, right? So you had, Mark Volman, basically the Flo and Eddie thing where they left, they joined Frank Zappa. But I can't think of anybody. I can't think of anybody that, you do have bands that went on and did things that, like, Bob Seger is just off the top of my head, right? So you had the Bob Seger system that dissolved, and then in the '70s he did that. We see a lot of those kind of things, but
Mhm.
not something that it was like, here's four albums, this guy left, we did another one, but we were still called this particular band.
Right.
That particular thing doesn't exist. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but a lot of it, Joe Bird and the Field Hippies, right? You do have a lot of like, oh, this guy was, he was in this band, and I think you have that change where, like, if you look at a band, for instance, like with like Cream, right, where you had Eric Clapton, he did stuff with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. He broke up. He did stuff with Cream. That broke up. He did stuff with Blind Faith. He did, his solo thing.
Right, but those
Derek
are
and the
different.
Dominos.
Those are different
Exactly. They're
bands.
different. They're completely different
They're
things.
different projects. Absolutely.
And I think if the Birds would have done that, Oldies Radio said there were five Bee Gees. There was, yeah, and they were those first three Bee Gees albums are fantastic, right? And again, there was that. I think that might be the exception to the rule. But to be honest, it's the brothers and then the other two guys that were in the band that nobody remembers. Um, so yeah, I think that we just didn't have that type of thing in the '60s. So. I'm going to go to so January 15th, 1968. Notorious Bird Brothers is released. Goes to number 47 in the United States. Goes to number 12 in the UK. So again, something
Mhm.
like you said, that the UK were a little more smarter in that case. Mark, he said he was still here. He said to me, The Notorious Byrd Brothers is the perfect culmination of their West Coast psychedelic folk sound, inspired bands like Beachwood Sparks. Yeah, I
Yep.
agree. Yeah, I
Yep.
think that I think that the sound just seems polished, and it's I think it's a good entry point for people that you want to listen to the Byrds, but like I want to listen to some of the album stuff by the Byrds. I feel like that's a better album to put in somebody's hand instead of Younger Than Yesterday or Fifth Dimension. You know what I mean? I think at this point each album has kind of gotten a little bit better,
Mhm.
and
I completely agree.
that's where we are. So, um, any other thoughts about Notorious Byrd Brothers, Steve?
Well, this is. I know I was too coy about it earlier, but yes, this is my
My
favorite
favorite. I
Birds
knew it.
album.
See, I knew it.
So you called it. I kind of nodded to everybody when you were looking down when you said that. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite Birds album. Again, I used to be Younger Than Yesterday, but I think that this one, like you said, is a little bit more polished. And again, like Mark said, this is the perfect blending of everything they've worked to this point. Draft Morning. I mean, to me, that should be right up there with All Along the Watchtower or some of those other, really popular Vietnam era songs. I think that this album kind of covers everything. They're everything but polka. Everything else that you could want from this band is on here. And to think that the Byrds could turn out something so perfect at a time where there's so much turmoil and so much infighting and so much nonsense and everything going on with the political world, the world in general, and especially in their little microcosm of the band, for them to turn out something as perfect as this is that much more genius. This album is, I can't think of a dud on this record at all.
Yeah.
This is, it's got, Old John Robertson, I think would fit on.
Yep.
Well, no, I love that song. I
like
love
it?
Old
Okay.
John.
All right.
I do. To me, that would fit on, some of their earlier stuff. Wasn't Born to Follow was the first song I heard about this from Easy Rider.
Right.
But this record, again, this is just, to me, this seems like everything. This is their Sgt. Pepper's. This was everything that they were working for, and this is their kind of their stamp of this is who we are, and this is our opus. This is our, this is I can't think of anything better than saying it's their Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah. No, and
so
I mean it's
can't recommend this higher enough.
Yeah, I think that you put it very eloquently, and you get that sort of feeling like the songs really mean stuff. Mark said Draft Morning should have been one of the era's greatest Vietnam songs.
Well, there we go.
Yeah, and I think again, it's not the one that you see like when they play Fortunate Son, where they're like, jumping out of the helicopters and doing that like they usually show. Like on the hey, this is the Vietnam War, right? This is what it was like. But yeah, it's a sad song, right? And just even I think too, like with you have sort of that psychedelic production where they're sort of doing like that kind of the kitchen sink kind of stuff, but sort of how it all kind of like blends together. Those are two, like where there's not really that the stop in the song, and really that whole first part, isn't that whole first side, isn't it almost like one continuous side? I feel like. Yeah.
What will they do? And that's why you kind of got to take this album as a whole. It's almost like Dark Side of the Moon, where you can't really pick apart and listen to songs. Right. You kind of got to listen to the whole. It's art. You got to listen to it as a whole experience.
Yeah. No, and I mean even Changes Now. I mean that's a great, again a great. That time has come today from the Chambers Brothers for Vietnam. Yeah, that's a great example. But yeah, Changes Now is a great one. And Craig wanted to say who better to replace David Crosby than the horse, right? So, Mr. Gluefoots.
Did you know that this was the 10th album ever released that had a synthesizer in it?
Okay, yeah, I think you were mentioning something like that, but that's pretty cool.
So I think Roger met who'd you call it? Gosh, I think Bob I have Mogg. It here. Yes. Yeah. at Monterey Pop,
Oh,
and was
really? Okay.
instantly, he met them at Monterey Pop and was instantly taken with that, and was like, I got to get one of those. And as soon as they got back into town, the first thing he did was phone them and order one, and had it shipped to the studio, and started playing around with it, and I think wrote a good amount on that. So
Mark Neely says Triad was another Crosby song that didn't make the cut in favor of the Goffin and King tracks. Yes, and we will talk about that. There's a great little thing that I wanted to add about that. So yeah, Triad, of course, was one of the other reasons why that David wanted that on the album, and yet they were picking something that was written by their songwriters that they wouldn't get the royalties from. So
now
following.
was Michael. Now was Michael Clark? He was sacked right after the recording of this record, wasn't he?
So he was out of the band in he was out of the band back in August of '67.
Okay.
But I think officially, like, he was.
So they made the official announcement that he
Yeah.
is no longer a Bird.
Yeah, because basically in early '68, this is when they start touring, right? So when they say, okay, we're going to tour on this album, this is when they add basically Kevin Kelly. So this was Chris Oldman's cousin, and they're like, yeah, we can't do this as like a three-piece. So of course they add. Oh, Graham Parsons gets added on keyboards, and oh man, 1968, here we are, right? So they head to Nashville. This is March 9th of 1968. They start recording Sweetheart of the Rodeo in Nashville. And then on March 11th, 1968, you remember that Zappa thing that we were talking about on the Monkees? That episode airs that Sunday. So now you had, oh, well, guess what? The monkey or the Monkees had this thing about the Byrds, and they're talking about lineup changes, and here's the Byrds touring, and now there's two other guys that we have no idea who they are.
Now it's even funnier.
Right, exactly.
Because it's true.
So that basically airs, I think, that Sunday. And then March 15th, 1968, the Byrds play on the Grand Ole Opry. So man, oh man, what?
Which went over great. They were so happy to see these long-haired guys from California.
Right. So what a week it was to be the Byrds at that point. So yeah, of course that didn't go over well at all. Of course they were, too hippie for the conservative country folks. And they got the catcalls and all that at them and everything like that. April 2nd of 1968, You Ain't Going Nowhere and Artificial Energy is released. That goes to number 74, and it goes to 45 in the UK. So it's pretty cool. So they really didn't, they did Going Back, right, as the single, and then they released Artificial Energy backed by You Ain't Going No. Well, You Ain't Going Nowhere was the lead single, and then that was on the flip side. So they were, even though it was like, this is a song that's going to be on our next album, they had one that was from the old album. So this is where that starts to, like, the timeline. Usually it's like you have the singles that build up to the album. This is like the first time that it's like that it's kind of backwards. So I feel like they're sort of losing a little bit of momentum in that, and then sort of by the end of the beginning of the 70s, at the end of their run, it's completely gone, right? Like they're not
Agreed.
even releasing singles anymore. Okay, so that's released in May 11th, 1968. They play an American Bandstand. They play 8 Miles High along with You Ain't Going Nowhere. So I thought that was sort of interesting that they were doing that.
What a contrast and a contrast in styles too. What a great band.
Yep. July 1st, 1968, music from Big Pink was released. So again, just an interesting little nugget there. And then in the middle of, so this was right around July 8th of 1968. They're over in the UK, and they're playing some shows at the Royal Albert Hall, and Graham basically quits the band. So they say, we're going to go play in South Africa. Some of the stuff that was going on with apartheid and things like that, they were like, no, we're not going to play, and Graham was like, I'm out of the band, right? So really he's only in the band for like 4 months, right? Like, so,
which is wild to think about.
right.
He toured and put an album in like a little over 90 days.
Yeah. And again, there was a lot of that. Like he was doing a lot of the lead vocals. He really wanted to kind of push them as far as some of the songs that they were doing. Um, and so and that really takes us to August 30th of 1968, and that is the release of Sweetheart of the Rodeo.
I'm gonna
So
go out on a limb and say that's your favorite Birds record.
that may in fact be my favorite Byrds record. Yes, it is. Um, this album is one that changed my life. Right, I would say that just some of the tunes on it. I mean, it's one that I can listen to start to finish anytime. Right, it's almost like to me, it's like the Velvet Underground and Nico. I can always put that album on, and I can listen to it, beginning to end. Um, yeah, just a fantastic record. I think there's what, two Dylan cuts on here. There's You Ain't Going Nowhere and Nothing Was Delivered, right?
Yeah,
That's on the Basement Tapes, I think. Yeah, but you have Pretty Boy Floyd, which is Woody Guthrie, The Christian Life, which is a Lovin' Brothers song.
it's a great song.
Um, Life in Prison, which is a Merle Haggard song. Um, I think Blue Canadian Rockies, is that maybe a Lovin' Brothers song too, I think, as well. But you got you have Chris Hillman sort of coming forward too on this a little bit. Gary Usher, again, he's producing this as well. So you had him doing psychedelic stuff, and here he produced "Sweetheart of the Rodeo." Number 70, that went to number 77 in the United States. So
And
um,
didn't chart at all in the UK.
didn't chart at all in the UK. I don't think they
So
were.
that's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, this is one of my favorite albums. I'll take a quick segue here. So in 19, Craig said another one that you turned me on to. You're welcome, sir.
Hey,
Uh,
very cool.
appreciate it. So in 2018, Chris Hillman and Roger McGuinn did sort of a Sweetheart of the Rodeo tour, where they played a lot of dates. It was cool because it was really just kind of like a West Coast, sort of East Coast kind of thing, and then they started peppering in more and more kind of shows. Uh, Bo. From, I don't know if you know him from his channel Earhead Six, he basically paid me a visit and we drove to Akron, and then maybe like a month later they added Pittsburgh onto the tour list. But it was fantastic. They played it front to back. Marty Stewart played a lot of like the B Bender stuff.
Very cool.
This is an album to maybe put on your
That's
radar.
a great record. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's a great album.
So this is basically
Oh,
the.
baby, is that autographed?
It
Look at
is.
that.
And Barnes and Noble was selling these for like $19, and yeah, it came with the CD
Yeah,
and everything.
that came out what, about 2016, 2017?
2017. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great record, man.
So you can see he's sort of kind of doing sort of like a Gilded Palace of Sin. So we will talk about that too, sort of on the cover. But yeah, it's a great, produced by Mike Campbell. So Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Yep.
It's a fantastic record. So they sort of played like some of the stuff from this, along with some of the stuff that happened, or some of the, of course, the Sweetheart of the Rodeo stuff. It was a great show. Saw it twice. I wish they would release it on like DVD. They were really strict about like don't record the show. Probably one of
I got you.
the things that I've ever seen. But
I got you. I got you.
I know there's stuff out there. There's stuff out there.
Okay. All right.
But we'll talk. So yeah, so Sweetheart of the Rodeo, just again, that you're right. That's my favorite record. But a number two would definitely be Notorious Byrd Brothers. So two great albums. So just before Sweetheart was released, Mark, I know that we had talked about something that wanted to talk about, sort of triad. So August 18th, so this was like 2 weeks before Sweetheart of the Rodeo came out, Jefferson Airplane released Crown of Creation, which had triad on it. So you can see that like right around that time, like it certainly didn't come out when they released the album. When did Notorious come out? That was in January, so you can see that made it onto that release for that. So, Mark was saying the rest of the band believed Graham's not wanting to tour South Africa was due with his obsession with Keith Richards and the Stones at that time, and that's correct. And he definitely was spending time with Keith and Co. At that particular time as well too. So you can see sort of as you can see their influence sort of as Sticky Fingers comes out, and sort of their
When
Beggar's Banquet, and that kind of time frame. So
you know, when I first heard Sticky Fingers, a friend of mine and I were listening to it for the first time. Both of us listened to it for the first time, and we Dead Flowers came. We're like, oh, where did these guys learn how to play like that? And of
yeah,
course,
Graham
later
Parsons.
on, yeah, exactly. It's like, well, that's Graham Parsons. That's exactly where they learned.
Yeah. Okay, so September 2nd of '68, I Am a Pilgrim comes out, and Pretty Boy Floyd, which again, you good luck, right?
Yeah.
Like, like I don't know how the heck that even why they. But again, what singles do you put out, right? Let It Bleed. That's right. That's what. I'm sorry. You're right. Let It Bleed was the album that would have been the one. Um, yeah. What do you do? How do you do that? You know what I mean?
I put out the Dylan covers. I don't know. That seems like always a safe bet, but this album was kind of commercially doomed to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. Because think of it, this predated Working Man's Dead, so the whole cowboy motif
Yeah.
hadn't really gone into it yet. You know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
was only around for just a short while, anyway.
Well, like I said, you think about Big Pink was the beginning of July, right? And then this was
Right,
the end of August. So that was like
right.
within 60 days, like those two albums came out. And Nashville Skyline didn't come out until 69, right? So it was like mid
So
69. So they were even still like, it was almost another year before that was sort of like Bob Dylan saying, like, yes, this is what. I mean, you had, John Wesley Harding, which I don't like, I feel probably closer to Big Pink than, you know, Sweetheart of the
the
Rodeo. Like if you look
Nashville's,
at it, yeah.
yeah, I think so too.
So, um, and then
But
so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, but originally Roger wanted to do a double album. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, he wanted to do what was the name we wanted to do? It was like supposed to be like a movie, like he was doing
Well,
like something like that.
well, yeah. I mean, it was gonna kind of cover like American music. So it was burlesque and Appalachian, rockabilly, country, jazz, rock, and it would kind of end with space music, psychedelic and
Right.
things like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but nobody else in the band was going for it. So uh, who knows? Hopefully that nothing was that was just a thought. Nothing was ever committed to tape. But if there's ever a lost album, man, that would be one to hear.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist, unfortunately.
September 15th, 1968, Chris Hillman quits after a concert. And then they recruit John York on bass, who he had played with the Sir Douglas Quintet. Um, so right after that time, this is a really great bootleg. I know we really haven't talked about really too much about Byrds live stuff, but this is the Avalon Ballroom, San Francisco, November 2nd, 1968. This is a fantastic Byrds bootleg. It is pretty. It is pretty. I mean, and you have just a shirtload of tunes, um, that they do. But they do. You can see at that time they were already starting to do stuff that was like on the next album. So they do like Old Blue. Um, my that I'm sorry, that's on that one. Let's see. Drugstore Truck Driving Man, which came out on a single a little bit later. Um, they were doing this Wheels on Fire. Um, they did Pretty Boy Floyd. So again, you don't miss the water. Hickory Wind, Bad Night of the Whiskey, which was another one. Nashville West. So they were really playing stuff at this point
That's playing everything on
that was
Dr. Bird.
right. Exactly. That was not. They weren't really doing. Even though Sweetheart of the Rodeo had just come out like 2 months earlier, they weren't really playing a lot of tunes from that. So this is a great bootleg. I think it's like a radio broadcast. So it's a very clean bootleg. So if you're not really like, if you can't really, if the historical importance to you is not really important and you want sound quality, this is a good one to go with. So it says
Well,
this.
on the flips,
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, it says this remarkable set was taped for radio broadcast very soon after the band's new lineup of Roger McGuinn, Clarence White, Gene Parsons, and John York. Despite the turmoil in their recent history, they turned in a superb series of performances on fascinating selection of songs, several of which they rarely played, featuring especially noteworthy guitar work from great Clarence White. It's presented here with excellent sound, complete with background notes and rare photographs, making it a vital document for all connoisseurs of 60s rock.
Give me $30.
It was cheap. It wasn't, yeah.
Yeah,
And I'll take
now I would
$30.
buy it.
Yeah. So that's one to look
So
for.
another one to check out on the flip side of that, if you can stomach coat pocket horrible recordings, there's well, I don't want to say it's not horrible, it's not amazing, but it is a little rough. Would be Roman 68, and it is with Graham Parsons.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll have to.
So that I believe it's on YouTube. If not, you can poke around a little bit and find it. That one, it's fun to hear Graham play and sing background vocals on like Mr. Spaceman and things like that. But it's in Rome and in '68. I don't know what the bootleg title of it is, but you can a quick search will bring it up, I'm sure.
Okay, so that takes us to 1969. So January 7th of 1969, they released Drugstore Truck Driving Man and Bad.
Can I say one more thing about Kevin Kelly?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know what else he played on?
Oh, there's something else. I know this.
So he played with Fever Tree.
Okay.
And he played with one of your favorites that you mentioned early in the broadcast, the Phil Ox, the Gunfighter Ballad or Gunfighter.
Oh yes, yeah. Yep.
So, but
that's a great record. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he also too. I have an Ernest Tubb 7-inch that he did. Like Ernest Tubb was like recording stuff in the 80s, and he
really.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. Yeah, and he was like the producer on it. Like he was like I'll find it for you. I'll send you a picture of it. But he did like some of the recording stuff with it. So it sounds like after he was with that stuff, he kind of like moved on to that. But yeah, Gunfight at the Carnegie Hall is one of my favorite Phil Ox record for sure. So
yeah. So anyways,
Fever Tree. Yeah, was he in the original lineup of Fever Tree?
I don't believe so. I don't know for sure, but I don't believe so.
They had like 2 albums, so they had like. So there's a couple possibilities. Okay, so that came out, and I don't think that charted. No, that didn't chart at all. So we kind of had two. The last 2 singles haven't charted at all. And then just to put it into perspective, February 6th of 1969, Gilded Palace of Sin comes out. So, man. One thing I was thinking about was like Gilded Palace of Sin is like the Byrds record that we always wanted, right?
Sure.
like if that was a Byrds record, could you imagine, right? Like I feel like that's, I don't know. To me again, that is a life-changing record for me. That and Burrito Deluxe is probably one of, that's in the top 10 for sure.
Oh yeah. Gilded Palace is easily in my top 10. Easily. Maybe that would be the follow-up to Sweetheart. Who knows?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Which is insane to think about.
And then there's so pretty much the next day and the following day, February 7th and 8th, 1969. This is where the official live album. This is like really there's only like 2 official, maybe 3. Live albums in the Byrds catalog. This is the one that has like the picture of the moon on it, but this is live at the Fillmore, right? So I didn't bring that down to show, but that was only released on CD as far as I know. And it's a nice set. It goes really well with that other bootleg that I had showed. So if you want to pick something up like that, go ahead. It's good. Like there's not much live Byrd stuff out there that's whatever. March 5th, 1969, you have Dr. Byrds and Mr. Hyde, which scorched up the chart at 153. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on this album?
So, I used to really like this album a lot more than I did. I'm going to say this. I absolutely adore this back cover.
Yeah,
I do. I absolutely, and I pulled this one down specifically. Good Lord, I'm okay. This picture right here, that's both spooky and cool, all at the same time. Like and
their space helmets, right? Yep.
Yeah, and this to me had so much potential to be that wonderful gap of like psychedelic country space rock, as Roger calls it. Right. It had so much potential, but I mean, after side 1, man, it falls flat and it falls hard. I used to hold this album a little bit more higher in esteem than I really did, but yeah, it sounds ludicrous, but I absolutely love that back cover. I think the whole jacket design is really great, too. But the funny thing is, they had 4 different lineups since June.
Oh, okay. See,
Yes.
I wasn't even
Yeah.
like keeping track, but
Yeah. Which is insane to think that there's still even a functioning band at this point.
it is pretty cool. Oh, we forgot about Candy. We forgot about the soundtrack
The
for
movie.
Candy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we forgot to
Yeah.
talk about that. But okay. Well,
Well,
we can't be perfect. We can't be perfect.
no, well, I mean, well, just real quick, we had mentioned that early. Well, not mentioned that, but we had talked about that when we were originally doing this last year, that year before last, whenever it was. But I mean, that was kind of like a 60s sex comedy that Roger wrote some songs for, and I think that the only ones that really came out from that was the title cut, Candy,
And Child of the Universe. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say it. I think that was it. I don't know that the project was ever complete. The movie came out,
Yeah.
but I don't know if there's much more on that. I've never seen the movie. It's free on Tubi if you really want to go and check it out.
Got it. But I mean, I think there's some great tunes on here. This Wheels on Fire is great. Old Blue, which is off of the Anthology of American Folk Music. That's like a
Love that song. Yeah,
super old tune. Nashville.
Your Gentle Way of Loving Me is amazing. That's to me that's probably the best song on this record.
Okay.
It's so great. Again, it could have fit on Sweetheart. I think that much of that song.
So we've kind of struck a nerve in the chat here. We have Craig says Dr. Byrds is an underrated album for me. I think it's a solid album. I'll say it's not their best, but far from their worst.
Oh, and I agree.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I just think that the wheels kind of fall off of it. I mean, once you get past, I mean, really, side one is great. It really is. Drugstore Truck Driving Man is fun for what it is.
King Apathy is a great tune. King Apathy is a great tune.
It is, but the last couple of songs, Candy, Bad Night of the Whiskey, that melody,
okay. I like that.
It's all right.
Yeah, I mean the My Back Page is BJ Blues, Baby What You Want Me to Do. Like it feels like they were just trying to fill the end of the record. Which
I'm sure they were at that point with all the lineup. They had to do something. But no, I don't want to give the misconception. And if I did, I apologize. I don't want to give the misconception that I'm panning this album. I'm not. It's just it just to me it had so much potential to be so much more than what it really was.
It's just a tired album. They just kind of seem tired. You know what I mean? Like it's just
and who could blame them at this point?
Yeah, like you're just like. There's, I forgot, I did write down when they sort of redid their contract with Columbia. I didn't go over that, but you kind of have to think about they renewed the contract in early 1968. So, you think about, okay, they had Sweetheart, and at this point this was only their second album into that contract. So who knows what that would have been, right? So it's probably
right.
Another 4 albums or so. But yeah, no, I think this is a good one. I think it is, Craig. I think you put it right where you said it was underrated. Not necessarily one that people talk about too much. Oldies Radio says they got it. And they got to dig it out and listen to it. You'll be glad that you did.
It's not a bad record. It's not a bad record at all.
Candy is a good movie but an awesome soundtrack. Goofy movie, but with an awesome soundtrack. So
okay.
All right, so that comes out, and then just to kind of put a little perspective on a couple of things. This is where there's some fun stuff that kind of happens here. So April 9th, 1969, Nashville Skyline comes out, right? So that is finally released. Which here's what's interesting. That album, of course, has Lay Lady Lay on it, right? And then on May 2nd, so like not even a month later, the Byrds release Lay Lady Lay as well.
really riding those coattails.
Fails to chart, right? So nothing even happens.
That's a terrible version.
Lay Lady Lay with Old Bill.
Terrible.
Right? Yeah.
It's terrible.
And then at the end of May 29th, 1969, you have the first Crosby, Stills, and Nash album comes out. So,
and that's an okay record.
They sold a couple of them. They sold
Yeah, one or two.
a couple of them, and that's it. Okay, so we're on to the final page. Hopefully, we can wrap this show up here. And
Yes, I
uh,
don't have much to say about a couple of these
yeah,
records.
so really, there's not too many lineup changes, so things kind of stay consistent here for pretty much from now until the end. So July 14th, 1969, that's when the Easy Rider movie comes out. So we know, of course,
Right.
that McGuinn, played the tune on there. Dylan gave it to him. He kind of did whatever, and that sort of was the ending of the movie. Don't want to ruin it for you if you've never seen it before, but and then at the same time, so right after that, so I feel like there's like this little like people are like, oh, the Byrds, right? They're in the movie, things like that. Um, July 29th, 1969, Pre-Flight gets released, right? So I know that we kind of put this on hold talking about this album. So
Yeah,
uh,
well, let's jump into it.
so Jim Dixon, that's what it is, Dixon. Thought it was Dickinson. He kind of like I think he becomes their manager one more time. There's some sort of connection that in they're like, hey, why don't you? No, Terry Melcher comes back. That's what it is. I think Melcher comes back. Um,
It's like 75. They're like, hey, hit music.
yeah. So they were like, hey, there's all these tunes that the Byrds had recorded. Let's put this out. And this actually went to number 84. So it did better than Dr. Birds and Mr. Hyde. Uh, and not as good as Sweetheart of the Rodeo. But again, you have that interest in the original material. I think there's that nostalgia thing that's kind of there. This, of course, is pretty much 5 years after all that stuff started coming out.
Right.
So yeah, and it's cool. It's a nice little to hear the early songs. There's a version of Mr. Tambourine Man that's just sort of like with a snare drum, like as a kind of a march. So to kind of hear that before they really perfected it, um, is that. So uh, Junk from the Trunk says last Birds record I have pre-flight. So yeah, it's an interesting sort of thing, and I like this how there's some talk about. I don't know if they call the Birds by name. Oh yeah, they do. In some of the liner notes, so you're not gonna be able to see that. There's a pretty big kind of liner notes thing here, but there's like a sticker on it, and even like on the jacket spine, it doesn't really say anything about it, the bird. So it's really like
Hmm.
it's not like anywhere on the album did it say like this is the Birds, other than like, hey, it's this. This is a sticker, right? So I don't know if this was on the Shrink and then somebody just put it on here, or this is on all the things. But it just says Together Records begins the archive series with the unique collection of the first recordings by Jim McGuinn, Chris Hillman, David Crosby, Gene Clark, Michael Clark, then professionally known as the Byrds. These 5-year-old recordings present the Byrds in their earliest form. So Together Records was also owned by Gary Usher. So that was sort
Okay.
of he sort of produced, the producer. They had that kind of thing. So that came out, and that went to number 84. Um, so August 15th through the 18th of 1969, what was going on? Well, the Mets were sort of in the running for the playoffs. No, that was
And Miracle
Woodstock.
Mets.
Yeah, the Woodstock. The Byrds were invited to go, and they just turned it down. They were like, we've done a lot of festivals. They did a lot of like the Atlanta Pop Festival was before that, things like that. They had performed in a lot of that, and they were just like, it's another festival. We're not going to go.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, so they didn't really miss anything out there. September 26, 1969, they released "Wasn't Born to Follow." That was a UK only single release at that point.
Hmm.
Um,
Maybe a tie into the movie.
yeah, I think that was probably what they were trying to cash in on. Um, and then, well, basically a week later in the U.S., they released "The Ballad of Easy Rider" with "Wasn't Born to Follow," which went up to number 65. So really, that's the highest charting single that they've kind of had since what? Um, mm, 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 mm. My Back Pages in
Yeah.
1967.
Yeah.
So and then you had let's see, November 2nd, 1969, Jefferson Airplane's Volunteers is released, which has Wooden Ships by David Crosby. Good, he was a big fan of the Jefferson Airplane, right? Um, and then you had also about a week later, The Ballad of Easy Rider. That album is released. That album goes to number 36. So really, this is like a huge bounce back for the Byrds. Um, you
Well,
know,
again, I think it has a lot to do with the movie was so huge.
exactly, yeah. So that's really the highest charting album that they've had since um, Fifth Dimension. So since
Yeah.
1966. So yeah, so I feel like there's like this, there's this really big, there's this push with the Byrds. I think they really could have capitalized on that. Um, what are your thoughts on that album? So
To me, I will say that the title track is like the perfect lament to the death of an era.
okay,
Like I really do. I think that so encapsulates the time. And I forget who said that, but I think that's just about perfect. That just kind of encompasses everything. But as far as this album, you and I talked briefly, and I do mean briefly, about Roger McGuinn becoming lazy. And
right,
I think that this is where we get that. I think that this is more or less. I mean, this is Clarence, isn't it?
right, yeah. Well, keep in mind that Dr. Birds and Mr. Hyde, every single one of those songs is a McGuinn song. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
vocal, McGuinn vocal, right? So he sings the lead vocal. Um, Here he's really just like what on "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue," "Jesus Is Just All Right." I think "Deportee," right? He's on that one. But most of the tunes like "Oil in My Lamp," what like "Fido," that's all like isn't that John York, I think, singing on that one? Um, yeah, so I mean, they really, I don't know. You're right. He gets kind of lazy, right? Like it's kind of like
No, no,
he
you
takes he takes a backseat to the other guys in the band, right? Where you think he would be the band leader.
well, but again, we talk about that struggle for the band. Was this ever really Roger's band?
Hmm.
I think by default, it's easy to say, well, yeah, of course it was because he was, the only original guy in there.
Right.
But you really look at it just, I don't know if it was just something where he was just burnt out
Hmm.
on just the constant lineup changes and everything else going on. And then, like you said, just singing on the last record, singing all of that entire album that, for something like this, he just kind of took a back seat to.
Yeah.
Um, but there's not outside of the title cut. I don't think that there's I'm looking at the title track now. I don't think there's really much else on here.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I like it. Is it for me? It's like I don't know. It's a good one to listen to that you really don't have to think about. You know what I mean? Like I don't really
I mean,
like.
Deportee is all
Yeah.
right.
Well, I mean,
You
again,
know,
that's a Cisco Houston song from way back
yeah,
when. That's not something that's really like again, that was like a traditional folk song, right?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it's on the back of the album, like you said, as when Easy Rider came out, it was like, oh man, the Byrds, like this is great. And the Ballad of Easy Rider is a really strong tune.
Oh,
I
it
mean,
is.
like
It is
um,
absolutely.
I think that really kind of carries the album, right? Again, produced by Terry Melcher, so Terry Melcher did this one, and then you got the big Peter Fonda sort of liner note on the back of it.
And
Odie
he
Ray,
wanted
oh,
he wanted CSN to do the soundtrack.
oh really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but Toby Hooper shot not Toby Dennis Hopper rather
Oh,
Toby Hooper. Geez, Dennis Hopper shot it down when they showed up in limos. He said anybody who rides in a limo won't get my movie. So they
right.
went with the Byrds.
There you go.
So.
Yeah, so it's an interesting sort of entry point. But one that you see kind of in the bins. I think this is one that's like, if there's one Birds album that you still see, it's this one because they did fairly well, so they did sell a lot of copies of it. Um, December 15th, 1969, they released "Jesus Is Just All Right." Um, that went to number 97. So Oldies Radio says everybody remembers the Doobie Brothers. Jesus is all right, right? So
Yeah,
the
no, they
Doobie
made a much bigger hit.
the Doobies brothers definitely made it a bigger hit. Um, so this takes us to 1970. So we're at February 28th, 1970, and March 1st, 1970. This is when the untitled live shows were being taken place, right? So they're at Madison Square Garden at the Felt Forum. So they're playing those. So you can think of, that's like, the theater of Madison Square Garden. It's not the actual garden. Um,
Well, and there's tons of these bootlegs out there too.
yeah,
There are tons of 70 and 71 shows
yeah,
that are out there. They were touring. You can even tell on the recording of Untitled how McGuinn sounds so hoarse. It's because they
right,
were playing so many consecutive shows.
yeah.
His voice was just shot from it.
And I think that this is we're kind of getting into my second favorite album, like Untitled.
Wow. Okay.
Is up there. I know that I said like Notorious Bird Brothers, but this is like, those are sort of like a rotating thing. Like I can really listen to that, and I know it's like greatest hits live for the most part, but
But it's good.
at the same time it's very listenable. Even in studio tracks, like there's some great studio tracks on it too. Again, just to sort of put everything into perspective, March 11th, 1970, Deja Vu is released by Crosby,
Oh,
Stills, Nash, and Sometimes Young. April 15th, Burrito 1970, Burrito Deluxe is released. And again, like you said, there's not really much going on at this point. No singles are coming out. Um, we pretty much roll all the way from those shows were recorded in end of February, March. We roll up to September 14th, 1970, and Untitled comes out, right? So now this album is released. Goes up to number 40 in the charts. What are your thoughts on this one, Steve?
well, it goes up to number 40 in the US, but it's at number 11 in the UK.
Sorry, I put my book away that had all that in it.
So I got you covered here.
Okay.
So it just seems like, again, like I said earlier, like these latter album Birds, starting I guess really with this one, really they were basically a bigger hit in the UK than they were the US.
Well, and I think that this again is it's a pretty appealing album. I think it's really one of the interesting things about it was that it's a double album, but it was just like the live adventures of Al Cooper and Mike Bloomfield. It's on the single label sort of catalog numbers, so
Mhm.
they sold it at a loss, right? So they were really just wanted to get some stuff out there and have this double album. um, Chestnut Mare, I think, is a great tune. It's a little
I
long. It's I
Oh,
think
really? You think so? See,
I
yeah,
no, I think the whole thing is great, right? I think the whole song
yeah.
is great, but I feel
It
like
just overstays it
as
well.
a single, right? Exactly. As a single, it's not something you'd be like, here's a single that like you just hear like, oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna catch it if I can. Okay.
I think
Um,
that's fair.
Truck Stop Girl. No, I mean it's an interesting song, but just not anything that is interesting. Of course, Take a Whiff. That's not a song that you can make a single out of. Um, We'll all
You all
come
look
back
alike.
home. You all look alike again. Just sort of a weird, it's good, but it's just sort of a weird thing. And then of
Hungry
course,
Planet a lot. That seems to be kind of one that. What are your thoughts on Hungry
well,
Planet?
I
I'm
think
I'm
I
super
want to say that
curious.
Kim Fowley helped them record that. So that's like where all those like
Yeah,
weird sound effects of like the earthquake and the breathing and things like that. That's kind of interesting. And even that what Welcome Back Home, where there's sort of like that chant at the very end of it. Um,
yeah.
Again, it's an interesting album that like it holds my attention. I don't feel like if it was just sides 3 and 4, like the actual studio stuff, it would have bombed. I feel that it needs that in concert thing. Like you just don't have the live album. And
Well,
you think about too like Grateful Dead, right? You got their live album came out in 1969. So that was like a thing. Like the recording had gotten to a point where it was um they could at least record these albums and they sounded decent and things like
well,
that.
that and you had Get Your Yayas out later on in the year too,
Hmm.
right? And so that was 69.
Right.
So one more thing, I've got here in my notes. Just a Season, I think is an amazing song. I think that and Chestnut may or may
Sure.
be probably the two best songs on the studio sides. And yeah, I mean, you talk about the live stuff. The live that just illustrates just what an untouchable hot live band those guys really were.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, when Lover on the Bayou cranks in, and you've got just the guitar wailing, you've got McGuinn's voice shot. I mean, it's a really, really good, and I think we finally understand, you know, with 8 Miles High, you finally understand that that's their Dark Star, right? That's their
Right.
vehicle for
The jam
jamming and
vehicle, right?
experience. It really is. And I've heard enough live versions. I don't know that they really ever
There's a
get it.
definitive, yeah. There's not a
So
definitive
so
like, right?
there's really not, because it never really goes anywhere. It's not like a Dark Star. I'm trying to think what else I can think of. What's another song by a
Well,
band where they can
there's
kind of
just the
like in Interstellar Overdrive? Like I never really think that there's any, like it never really goes anywhere. It never really charts. It goes in uncharted water or anything. I think it's a safe jam, if you will. You know what I mean?
there's the motif, right? So they have that there's the 8 miles high that they do that, and then it just sort of goes wherever, and then they bring it back, you know what I mean? So it's just, there's that sort of those two little parts to it, and they just, hey, they jam out on it. But it's good. I think it's, again, that's, like I said, it's one of my favorite ones. And then when they remastered it, where they did that one, where they made it almost like two,
Oh yeah, there's a
the
there's a slew of live stuff on
yeah.
that one.
Well, and it's later concerts, I think, that were in maybe right around the time of when this came out, so like in August or so. But um, yeah, that's a just a great that's a great album. Um, so yeah, it hit number 40, which again was a little less than Ballad of Easy Rider, but um, it was good, right? The people liked
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
October
it's
23rd,
definitely worth your time.
October 23rd, 1970, they released Chestnut Mare and Just a Season. So, as you said, probably two of the best tracks on
Yeah,
there.
I mean, if you're going to release a single, of course, those are going to be the ones, right?
Yeah, and doesn't chart in the U.S., but goes to number 19 in the U.K. So again, like
Yeah.
there was a lot, I think there was a lot of hype around that album. And if you look at like where they were touring, they were playing at a lot of colleges and things like that. And it's like that was sort of the type of audience that they were looking for. They'd kind of finally evolved, and a lot of the people that they're playing to, you think about 4 or 5 years ago, those were the young kids that were buying Mr. Tambourine Man or whatever.
Mhm.
They were just teenagers at the time, and now they're in college. Um, so then we get to so a few things here. So that really closes out 1970 for us. There's really not much going on. As you said, 71. They're touring like crazy. Um, Pretty much in so this is May 7th of 1971. They release a UK only single of "I Trust" and "This Is the Way," which I'm sorry, "I Trust Everything's Going to Work Out Fine" and "This Is My Destiny." I wrote that down. That was a UK only single, which we would sort of see on the next album, Bird Maniacs. Um, and that single kind of coincided with, they did a Royal Albert Hall show. They were doing like a UK tour.
Mhm.
So this is let's see what we got here. We got May 13th, 1971. Sundays put out that album. I don't have that on vinyl. I do have it on CD. They also released like live in Holland. This is like just a couple of tunes on as a 7 inch. So to me, I feel like, like you said, they were recording a lot. I feel like a lot of this stuff is out there.
Oh yeah.
If we would ever see a box set of live, there's never going to be anything from that, that 65, 66 era. That stuff just doesn't exist. But we would see something of like from the 70s, 70, 71,
Oh yeah,
something like that.
especially 70 and 71. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's a slew of them.
Um, so June 23rd, 1971. They released Byrds Maniacs. I do not have this one on vinyl because I think they sold about 6 copies total of the album. It did go to number 46. So
Wow.
again, we're really these last three albums have been in the top, almost the top 40, right? Two have been in the top 40. One was 46. Um, what do you think of this album?
Uh,
Do you have it on
n-
vinyl?
n-
Do you have it on
I
vinyl?
do not.
Okay.
I do not. I do not. I don't even own this album on CD.
Okay.
So this is strictly one that I stream when I feel like hearing it, and I get to a couple of songs and I'm kind of like, all right, that's enough. I Trust is okay. I Want to Grow Up to Be a Politician seems to be a song that people dump on. I
Right.
kind of like it because it's goofy and just kind of weird and out there a little bit. But yeah, this album, I mean, I just think they were just kind of going through the motions at this point. I get that, and I get that with Farther Along even more. I just really do. I just think that this is the point where the band is strictly living on its live shows, and they're kind of resting on their laurels at this point. They're still a great live act. Don't get me wrong. There's and there's again there's a ton of bootlegs out there if you go out and look. Not that I'm encouraging that kind of behavior, but should you do it, there are a lot of bootlegs that can attest to that. They were a red hot live band. They really were. But I think right now they're just kind of resting on their laurels, and unfortunately, I think at this point they're not a nostalgic act because they're still charting.
Right.
But I do think that it's they're in their twilight years at this point, and I think they know it too.
So we got some great comments from the chat here. We have Oldies Radio says, I've seen it places, didn't buy it. Probably made a good decision there.
I would agree.
Craig says he has Bird Maniacs, but he doesn't have Easy Rider. Craig, what are your thoughts? You've been kind of silent for most of the for some of this, and I know we've been talking a lot. Everybody wants to go to bed, I'm sure. But
we're almost done.
Yeah, we still got 6 people on, so there's still 6 people watching.
Well, thanks for hanging with us. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
We appreciate it. Craig, what are your thoughts on Bird Maniacs? What do you think? I'm gonna wait for him to respond, but I feel like a tune like Glory is great. Even Citizen Kane, I know it's a little weird, but it's like it has that. I feel like it has that sort of baby boomer nostalgia where they think about silent movies and things. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's what that song's about. Like I feel like I maybe understand what they're talking about their younger days. That like, hey, this stuff was going on, things like that. As you said, I Want to Grow Up to Be a Politician. I think that's another Kim Fowley song, if I remember correctly.
Maybe that's why I like him so much, just because it's got that, I don't know, it's got a hook.
Jamaica Say You Will, I think is a pretty that's a
Jackson Browne
song, right? Yeah. So it's like they're like, screw Dylan, we're gonna record Jackson Browne instead. So
wasn't he pegged as the new Dylan at one point, just like John Prine and Springsteen and everybody else who had a harmonica and a acoustic guitar?
Craig says it's a stinker. He said, okay, not slamming it completely, but I just don't play it. Yeah, I mean, you don't like.
And you know what? Not to be a jerk, but let me just say this: why in the heck would you, when you've got Younger Than Yesterday and Notorious Bird? Why would you go to Bird Maniacs? Why would you do that? Again, I'm not being ugly. I'm just saying, why would you put that record on when you literally have 3 or 4 or 5 other records you can choose from that are much better?
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I listened to it maybe 3 times this week.
In your entire life?
Yeah, this week, just preparing for the show and just kind of.
God bless you. Bless you. I was like, okay, all right, I'm done with this.
I mean, it to me, it's one of those ones that's sort of like between this and Easy Rider, it's kind of the same sort of thing, right? This one does have a lot of sort of bloated production and. That was one of the things where they like turned in the album and then Terry Melcher put all this extra stuff on it, and then they were like, what did you do? Like, well, how could you not, like, oh, we were on tour, right? That's what they were doing. They just like, here's the album, they like crapped it out and then like gave it to the record company. Here's the album for our thing. And I mean, it's Oldies Radio, no. Not really missing out on too much. If you're a completist, I'd say if you want it, like Steve said, stream it, or I'm sure you can get it on CD for like $5 with the bonus tracks. Yeah. It's just interesting if you want to listen to it, just to listen to the just in the evolution. Oldies Radio said phoned it in. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, no, it did. They were completely doing that. And you know what? The death masks on the cover is pretty telling, because this band, I mean, 1 foot in the ground, 1 foot on a banana peel, and phone it in, resting on their laurels, whatever you want to say. This is You know, again, if somebody wants to defend this record, I'd love to hear the argument. I'm not being facetious. If somebody has some positives to say about this, but this and Farther Along are rough listens.
Yeah, they're definitely tough listens for sure. I mean, I like Farther Along though. I like Farther Along better than this, and
Do you?
I just
Do
realized
you?
I
I
forgot.
mean, I like it better than this. This is.
Yeah,
Would you say that this is their worst album in their catalog?
I 100%. Yeah,
I would agree.
yeah. I
I
think
would. Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
I think, and we'll talk about that when we get to Farther Along, and I'll tell you why. But again, this is just one of the. It's just a strange album. It's just like,
It's
and I
pointless.
and I
It
remember
goes nowhere.
and I remember we had it on CD. I remember when we had it on CD at the record store, we had it like used, right? And it was like in our used bin for like $6 or $7, and like it was so low priority for me. Like I know that even after I left, that CD was still there because it was just like you'd be like, oh hey, what's this? Like, oh, what's on this? Like you just don't know, right? Um, so let's see. So August, we're up to where are we at here? Okay, so August 20th, 71, they released Glory Glory Citizen Kane. That did not chart at all. Um, and then
Shocker.
yeah, exactly. No big surprise there. And then about 3 months later, you have Farther Along comes out. There was no single. They didn't lead it off with a single or anything like that. And we have another scorcher here. That went up to number 52 on the charts.
152.
Oh, 152. That's right. I'm sorry. Did I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that came out, and then about 2 weeks later, November 29th, 1971, they released America's Great National Pastime,
Woo.
and then backed with Farther Along. Did not chart as well, which that's a weird song. I mean, um, Craig got to go. Hey, we'll see you, Craig. Happy
See you, man.
Thanksgiving. Take
Be
care.
safe.
We got one more album to go through, so I'm sure we're going to be done in about 10 minutes anyhow. But
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
for sticking with us. Sorry that the stream was a little slow on the draw. Um, but yeah, that America's Great National Pastime. I 100% believe that that's a Kim Fowley song. And again, it's a weird song.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not good.
the first time I was exposed to it was there's this greatest hits album that they had. There was a Byrds greatest hits album at Walmart. This would have been probably
Super hits were there in the field.
they're not in the field. It's like a yellow cover that's sort of like it almost looks like a comic book, and then they're
Okay.
all sort of standing behind like a door. I'll send you a
Oh,
picture of it.
okay.
But it
Okay.
definitely has like David. It's definitely from like Younger Than Yesterday kind of thing. Um,
Because the
Oldies
one I'm
Radio.
thinking, I think
D,
it's like a
thanks.
super hits.
Yeah. Oldies Radio got to go. He said, got to chase that
Hey.
paper tomorrow. So thank you for
All
ringing
right.
in. We'll
Thanks
see
for
you.
hanging.
Take care, Oldies Radio. That was my first kind of introduction um, to that particular song. And I bought that CD just because I was like, I had no idea what, I had no idea what song that was. I was like, I didn't even know that like that was on Farther Along. I hadn't even like heard of that album before. So, um, that was like my first exposure to that. So, what are your thoughts on the Farther Along album? Again, more of
You
the
know,
same.
yeah, kind of. I think it's definitely better. It's a step up at least. Let's see what I have in my notes here. Lazy Waters I think is a cool song.
Okay.
But there's I mean, there's just not much else. I mean, they're to me, the last two records, they're completely phoning it in.
Yeah.
And they're completely phoning it in. Clarence White gets a lot of praise, and unfortunately, I think he's kind of buried on these albums, so to speak, or at least I don't think he was getting very much support from Roger. Had they been a little bit more committed, and maybe they had a little bit more popularity, I guess, with other albums, they could have really hunkered down and turned something out. But this is, I don't know. To me, this is a once great band. It's such a sad note to see that this is what this band is kind of devolved into.
Yeah. And it's weird to see sort of like they're kind of like in this sort of rock and roll sort of that they said that's what they were sort of doing, like this 50s sort of rock and roll throwback kind of thing is sort of the vibe
Which
that they
is
were,
weird.
which was
You know, they did the cowboy motif before the cowboy thing is. American Graffiti came out in 73, so they're doing the 50s throwback thing. They're always like a year or two like ahead
Yeah,
of things. So
yeah,
maybe they're trendsetters in a way.
yeah. So yeah, it's a strange album, and it just doesn't, again, it doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't really go anywhere. Um, it just is like you said, it's kind of a sad note, which is kind of good because then when the Byrds, right? So the next album that comes out, um, that's kind of, at least it sort of ends on a high note, right? So
It does.
as of high of a note as you could get in 1973. Um, so let's see here. So uh, pretty much again, farther along comes out. Um, there's really nothing that goes on until September of 1972. So we pretty much go from November of 71 to September of 1972. No lineup changes, no really anything. They're just touring, they're just doing their thing, right? Um, Gene Parsons is fired in September, and pretty much in October of that year, there's sort of like people were like Gene got fired. There was like these rumors that the original Byrds were all going to get back together. So in October, there's sort of these meetings of Roger and David, and everybody's kind of like getting together. And then by February of 73, see that I got 3 lines on my notebook where we went from May to 71, September of 72, and then to February of 73. So again, not really
Mhm.
much at all going on with the band. Skip gets fired in February 10th of 1973. They got a couple of shows left to do, and McGuinn reaches out to Hillman and says, "Hey, can you play bass?" Right. So they have 2 shows. There was one February 23rd and the 24th. Hillman joins for the 23rd one, and they do on the 24th. They are just like, no, um, we're just going to cancel that one, and that's pretty much it. That's the end of that Byrds lineup. Um, and then in basically I'm sorry. So those shows were in February of '73. In March 7th of 1973, the Byrds um, release "Full Circle," the single, and it doesn't go anywhere either in the U.S. or the U.K. David Geffen basically pays a ton of money to get the Byrds back together, and and record and do their thing. So they're on Asylum Records for this one, right? So Joni Mitchell's on that, Tom
The
Waits is on that, the
Eagles,
Eagles,
yeah.
exactly. So all these bands that he could bankroll are on this. Um, and then you have let's see, it was March. Wait, I'm sorry, did I mess that up? No. Um, so I'm sorry. At that point, then they released the Full Circle album, which actually goes to number 20. So it's just like
Well,
it's
I think that shows you that what a good label behind you can really do. If the label
mhm,
really sees potential into it, and whether he saw potential or not, David Geffen's like, I got to make some money on this.
mhm.
So
And then they release on April 11th. They release "Cowgirl in the Sand" and "Long Live the King," and that's it. And that is the end of what we know as the Byrds.
wow,
And so people were kind of like upset that they didn't release any like Bob Dylan songs, and they said, well, the reason why is because that Neil Young was the Bob Dylan of the '70s. From David Crosby's mouth. I read that.
wow,
So we did it.
we did it.
full,
A
full
year or two in the making.
Full circle was a
Every
late Doors album, Doors post Morrison. Yes, we do know. Oldies Radio, we had a podcast that we put on SoundCloud, and I believe that track is still up there where Steve and I talk about Full Circle and
and how much I love
other
that album,
other other voices.
I am saying that within every honest bone of my body. I really do enjoy Full Circle.
They flew away. So, final thoughts. I feel that the Byrds are um, influential in a lot of the bands that the Americana genre in general. I believe they were the reason why we have that, right? If
Well, I mean, let's that whole uh, that whole '70s kind of Eagles, Jackson Brown, uh, basically every artist that's on the bridge, I think,
right, yeah,
you
yeah,
know, truthfully, I think every artist that's on the Sirius XM channel, the bridge, I think owes a debt of gratitude to the Byrds, and being funny, but uh, being sincere at the same time. I think that their influence, I think, can't be overstated. I mean, there's especially the Eagles, you know.
hmm
I
right,
think that's kind of, had the Byrds maybe stayed together, they probably would have ended up sounding something similar to that, or something in that vein, sort of. Um, but I also think for them to be as influential as they are, I think they're still an underrated band that is really only known for just a couple of songs early on in their career, but there is so much more that just gets neglected and forgotten about and just kind of passed over, unfortunately. Notorious Bird Brothers is amazing. Sweetheart of the Rodeo is amazing. Younger Than Yesterday, Fifth Dimension, Untitled, these are just all essential records that I think are more than worth your time. um they're I don't know. I hate saying American Beatles, because I mean that just is just
yeah.
kind of, just kind of tossed around a little too much. But I think that I think they're definitely unfairly underrated, and their latter albums, well, their middle period, excuse me, she should definitely be in just about everybody's collection. I can't think of a reason not to own those albums.
I think that one thing that we see quite a bit is you see the singles from Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn Turn, and those are always, like I said, they're those time capsule tracks that it's just like when you want to put something on about the 60s, they'll talk about that. And then there's the period where you have Fifth Dimension and Younger Than Yesterday, where they sort of talk about, oh, the beginning of psychedelic music. But that's the part where they drop off, right? And you don't hear anything about the Byrds until they people start talking about Easy Rider, like the Easy Rider movie, and oh, okay, here's Wasn't Born to Follow, and where there's that burn, that guitar line is just that real chiming, where they do the montage in the movie where they're standing on the bikes, and
Mhm.
there's the sun coming through the canyon and all that kind of thing, and that's what people think about of the Byrds, like that's it. Like I feel like that is the when we sort of bottle up the Byrds and we give it to people, that's what they think. And I think that Sweetheart of the Rodeo has definitely. I think there's people that know about that album, and the people that know about that album love that album. You know what I mean? Like
Is there is,
they
is there anybody out there who's listened to that album and said, no, I don't like it? No, they don't exist.
right. And I think too that you it's like they were so far ahead of their time that they just it did take a little bit of time for people to catch up with them. And like I said, if you think about even with like Dylan, I think they got ahead of him. Like I think Dylan has always sort of been the countercultural sort of person, right? Throughout, a lot of people looked at him and said, okay, this is whatever Dylan was doing, that's what they were doing, right? You either looked at Bill, you looked at Dylan, or you looked at the Beatles, or you looked at both, and then you were sort of like, okay, this is the way that we sort of navigate that. Um, and I think the Byrds got ahead of them, right? They got really, you think about music from Big Pink, like that whole movement. Like I said, that was like 60 days between those two albums, and that's you know super bizarre to think that those albums were like within 60 days they were like tell me about an album that you've bought from an artist that it was like this album came out and then 60 days later something else came out and you're like this is a mind-blowing album, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. And again, you have those separate parallel moments in music where there's that certain shift and everybody just kind of shifts it just a wee little bit, You have Jimi Hendrix that comes along and things just he starts doing Are You Experienced, and we just start shifting a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. Each band shifts it a little bit, you know, and then at that point we got full blown psychedelic music with Sergeant Pepper, right? And so I think that's to me that's what their legacy is. They were one of those bands that sort of just really we got from folk music to psychedelic music with them in a matter of 2 years.
But the other thing about it too is I also think that they're a band filled with tragedies. You know, they really are. Uh, and I just feel like there's a lot of missed potential. You think about somebody like Clarence White or Graham Parsons, who, you know, they both died early in life. So
By
you just have to
73, both of
think,
them were dead in
yeah,
73.
yeah, exactly. So you got to think, just with that much talent, just gosh, wouldn't another couple of Byrds records with those guys on it? I mean, what would that be like? You know,
Yeah.
that's just one of those things that, you know, of course we're never going to know, but um
Like, how cool
gosh,
would it have been if they did Sweetheart of the Rodeo, the tour, and, you know, Parsons
and
was there?
Graham,
Yeah.
yeah, and followed it up with Gilded Palace of Sin,
Right.
and then Burrito, and then on Untitled, and then Burrito Deluxe, or vice versa. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
how cool would that have been? You know, but unfortunately, of course, things didn't, you know, work out that way. But I also think that there's a lot of misses too. You know, there's more hits, but I think there's a fair amount of misses too, unfortunately.
I think that, and this will be my final thought. So, Steve, first off, I want to say thank you for making it through this marathon that we
Hey,
did. I think that
thank
we,
you.
I think we,
Thanks for your such detailed research too.
I think we did it justice. So, hopefully, when somebody comes across this video on the internet, they'll be like, I don't know, I don't know.
Hey, these guys know what they're talking about.
Hopefully that does something for somebody. That's all that
Yeah.
matters to me. It's a pleasure to spend the time with you to talk about that, and certainly all the
Likewise.
folks that chimed in on the chat. But yeah, I think that my final thoughts is the Byrds are just an amazing band. That there's a lot of what ifs. It is a tragic story. It is something that as much of a band that has had so much fame and where they're looked at as one of the pioneers of rock music, it's just like there could have been more, right? And it's just I think it's one of those things that even David Crosby's sort of like he's at the point where with some of the stuff with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, that they're just like you can't replace that time. Once that
Mhm.
time has passed, you know they're done. They could have been monsters. Imagine what you know maybe again you got to think about, okay, all those guys, Stills leaves Buffalo Springfield, Nash leaves the Hollies, Crosby leaves the Byrds, and they create something else that's brand new. Like that's why I said if they would have dissolved it after those first two albums, if those were the Byrds, and then we had whatever else that happened after that, I think that there could have been there's some good what ifs here. We'll never know, but I feel like
Yeah.
there was some good what ifs with the band. So, all right, final thought. That's it.
Go buy Notorious Bird Brothers if you don't own it. Get it. It's
That's right.
amazing.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody.
So
Thanks for tuning in, and
happy Thanksgiving. Be
happy
safe.
Thanksgiving. We'll probably see you sometime next week. So,
Yeah.
take care.
See ya. Sports truly.
Sports truly. If I can remember how to do this. There we go. Minimize. Good night.